Hearts and Homes 1. Black Nail walked away from the village that stood in the clearing behind him and headed over toward Gob and the feral goblins. They were lounging about among some bushes and tree stumps at the edge of the forest. Geralt trailed after Black Nail. I'm surprised you didn't talk to Gob more on the way here. You've barely said 2 words to him since your reunion, Geralt had said as they moved. Black Nail sniffed in annoyance before replying. Why would I want to speak to him? He's a hobgoblin, so he has nothing interesting to say. Well, if he learns a few more words, Geralt had argued before Black Nail snorted rudely and cut him off. No, wrong. I mean Gob has nothing to say because he lives out in a forest with a bunch of goblins. I've seen the forest and I know all about goblins. Talking about those things would be dumb. Geralt wasn't able to come up with a reply to that before they reached Gob's side. The hobgoblin looked their way and then bowed his head submissively towards Black Nail. This just caused Black Nail to snort again, however Geralt greeted Gob with a cheerful wave and a smile. The two then began communicating through hand gestures and a few human words as Black Nail watched. Most of it was confusing nonsense, but it certainly seemed like Geralt was asking Gob to send out goblins to help scout the forest. Yes. Yes, Gob replied in a scratchy voice after Geralt had finished speaking. The hobgoblin's head bobbed up and down enthusiastically as he spoke, and then he looked toward Black Nail. There was a questioning look in his eyes, and he was obviously seeking Black Nail's approval to do whatever Geralt had just asked of him. He didn't get it right away. Black Nail stared at Gob suspiciously for a second before reluctantly nodding. He had no reason to go against the plan now, but he couldn't resist ending the nod with a haughty growl. Black Nail wanted to remind Gob who the boss was. It was him. He was the boss. Gob immediately turned around and made a barking sound. The goblins who were loitering all around him perked up and looked his way. When he had their attention, Gob hissed and grunted at them a few times before motioning towards the forest. Black Nail watched intently. He had no idea what any of those stupid sounds were supposed to mean. When he tried to command the goblins, it usually took him much longer. Gob was certainly very useful to have around, which unfortunately meant Black Nail couldn't kill him yet. The goblins muttered amongst themselves for a few moments before running off into the woods. One of them tried to stay behind, but Black Nail gave the lazy critter a swift kick that sent him scampering off into the bushes. The little pest was probably going to sit down somewhere out of sight, but there was nothing Black Nail could do about it. Soon all the goblins had left except for Scamp and Imp. Both of them were still sitting over by the bandits. Black Nail briefly considered giving them both a kick and forcing them out into the forest as well, but Scamp was useless and Imp was still wearing his backpack. Black Nail was afraid an impact might cause something in the sack to explode. I hope you know what you are doing, Beardy remarked as he walked up next to Geralt. Black Nail shrugged. It's Geralt's idea, so everything that goes badly is his fault. The bandits then fell into quiet conversation as they watched the village from afar and waited for the goblins to return. It took a little over half an hour for the first of the green critters to come back. The goblin scampered out of the bushes and ran over to Gob with an excited gleam in his eyes. The hobgoblin and the goblin grunted at each other a few times, and then Gob turned towards Black Nail and pointed out into the forest. It looks like they've found someone, Geralt remarked. Let's see who it is, Black Nail replied eagerly as he motioned for the rest of the humans to join him. The hobgoblin had gotten sick of waiting around. Recently, when he stayed still, he couldn't help but think back and reflect on his memories. This wasn't something he enjoyed. Whenever Cedar's face came to mind, cold rage flared to life in his chest. It was only by keeping busy that he had managed to stay calm. When they were ready to move, Black Nail signaled Gob. The feral hobgoblin hissed at the goblin that had come back, and the pair began walking off into the forest. Black Nail and his human minions followed behind them silently. They circled through the thick greenery around the edge of the clearing for a few minutes. The goblin then sniffed an exposed tree root and veered off deeper into the woods. Black Nail eyed the surroundings carefully as they moved. It was faint, but the dirt here had been beaten down and hardened by footsteps into a trail that led from the village off into the woods. People were obviously using this path frequently. The goblin and the bandits followed the trail for a few minutes, until the sound of voices reached Black Nail's ears. Gob noticed them at the same time, and both the hobgoblins immediately stared ahead towards the noise's source. As he listened, Black Nail raised a hand to signal for silence and slowed his pace. He took extra effort to move quietly as he continued to walk forward. It sounded like only 2 people were talking, a man and a woman. Black Nail smiled. That was a perfect size group for the bandits to target, so he kept creeping closer through the underbrush, and soon he spotted his quarry. There were 3 humans, not 2. One of them had simply been staying quiet. The first 2 were standing right next to each other. One of them was a blonde girl and the other was a brunette boy. They were a few feet from the path and looking at something on the ground. There were several branches and bushes in the way, so the details were hard to make out, but that much was visible. Black Nail crept up beside a tree and peered around the trunk to get a better look, but he didn't have any luck, so he switched to studying the third person. There was a second young man leaning up against a tree a few feet from his companions. He was blonde and he had a look on his face that betrayed a mix of annoyance and disgust as he watched the other 2. Apparently Black Nail wasn't the only one that noticed the boy's expression. The other young man with brown hair did as well, and he spoke up. Why did you come with us if you are just going to glare and make stupid faces at my back? You know the reason. Anyone going out into the woods needs to be in groups of at least 3, the blonde young man replied. But we're only a few minutes away from home. This is practically our yard. The rules still stand. You never know what's out here. The forest is a dangerous place and I wasn't going to let my sister come out here without any real protection, especially with you. What the hells is that supposed to mean? The brunette boy replied indignantly. There was a rustling as he rose to his feet, but the other boy just smiled. It means I don't think you can take care of yourself let alone others, and if you trip over a root and crack your skull then I don't want her to have to carry you back herself. There was a second of angry silence before the girl spoke up. Come on boys, stop arguing, it's just silly. Let's have a good time. After that their voices grew quieter so Black Nail carefully retreated back to the rest of his party. He had heard and seen enough anyway. These people would make great hostages and would be easy to capture. They were clearly idiots with little in the way of survival skills. What did you see? Geralt asked Black Nail when he got back. His voice was quiet and nervous. Behind him stood the other bandits and Gob. 3 scrawny and weak-looking humans. 2 males and a female, Black Nail replied. Great, let's grab them. Beardy said as he stepped forward. He didn't get very far though, because Black Nail sniffed disdainfully and got in his way. No, that's stupid. You can't just rush in there or they will escape, stupid. Then what should we do? It's obvious. You need to cut them off and encircle them, Black Nail explained as he raised a finger and drew a circle in the air. As everyone listened the hobgoblin laid out his plan. If there was one thing that Black Nail was an expert at it was hunting down prey, especially human prey. They were very predictable. When they were done planning all the humans split into 2 groups and headed off in different directions. Black Nail told Gob and the goblins to stay put, and then he followed after Geralt's group. A second later, he spun back around and hissed at the goblins that were shadowing him until they ran back to Gob. The stupid creatures really needed to take some initiative and learn a proper language so he could yell at them properly. Geralt led his half of the group through the forest for a minute until they were well away from their quarry, and then they stepped onto the path and leisurely began following it back. Black Nail pulled his hood up and kept to the behind his human minions. He was supposed to stay out of sight so that his fearsome greatness didn't scare the humans too much, or something. He had forgotten the exact reason but it wasn't important. Before closing the last stretch and approaching the 3 youths, Black Nail raised 2 fingers to his lips and whistled to signal their approach. The sound was almost indistinguishable from that of a real bird, and from off in the forest there was a quick reply from the other party, so they kept moving. It hadn't been a very good reply, unless the signaler had been trying to imitate a bird that had died halfway through its song, but it served its purpose. Both groups were in position, and the 3 youths came into sight. I'm telling you that last bird call was weird. We should head back. What if it was a harpy or something, the shorter brown-haired boy told the other. The blonde woman was pressed up against him, and all 3 of them were standing on the path together and talking. There would have to be more than one harpy to threaten us, and they know better than to come near here. Every time one of those things shows their ugly face a hunting party is sent out to exterminate them. Our father still has a skull he got from the last hunt, the blonde young man replied. He didn't sound too concerned. What about goblins? Those stunted wretches, what about them? I know the old folks like to tell horror stories about them but that's all they are, stories. We're in no danger from goblins. You're just being jumpy. Suddenly, the girl looked past her companions and spotted the bandits walking their way. She froze as she studied them, and then she flinched and her mouth fell open slightly in shock. The 2 boys noticed her behavior and turned to see what she was looking at. Oh, hello there. Geralt greeted them. His voice was pleasant and he waved a hand in their direction. The men behind him also smiled, but in a far less friendly way. They were about 30 feet away now. The taller blonde boy was the one that replied. His voice stuttered nervously as he spoke and he had gone pale. He was clearly terrified but trying not to show it. Who are you? I'm just a harmless traveler who has gotten lost and is looking to get some directions, and maybe some shelter for the night, Geralt replied with a broad reassuring smile. The girl stepped closer to the other boy and hugged his arm tightly to her chest. She didn't seem convinced. And what about all the men behind you with the weapons? The blonde boy asked as he stuck out an arm and pushed the other 2 back behind him. All 3 of the youths then took a few nervous steps away from the bandits. They are my associates. The forest is a dangerous place for a lone traveler. You don't need to be afraid of them, Geralt replied in the same calm voice. It looked like the young humans were going to bolt off into the forest, but they didn't get a chance. There was a rustling sound as the other group of bandits stepped out of the bushes and onto the path behind the youths. The youngsters paled even more when they saw the newcomers. They were surrounded now, and they knew it. Those are also some of my associates, Geralt had said as the young woman began trembling. What do you want? The shorter boy asked as he held the girl and glared defiantly Gerlod's way. I already told you. I just want to ask you some questions, that's all. We can all be friends, so why don't you sit down so we can talk, Geralt answered. This time there was a cold tone to his voice that made it clear that he wasn't making a suggestion. All 3 of the youths stepped closer together. There was a desperate look in their eyes as they searched for an escape route. Sit, Geralt had ordered them as both groups of bandits closed in. All 3 of the youths immediately sat down on the ground. The rough-looking and dirty bandits quickly took the opportunity to encircle them. If you harm us our parents and the others will hunt you down, the blonde-haired boy explained. There were amused chuckles from a lot of the bandits. Kata's laugh was one of the loudest, and her voice drew the tall blonde boy's attention, and he clearly had no idea what to make of her because he frowned in confusion. I don't want to harm you, Geralt had reassured them as he crouched down so that their faces were almost level. I just want to ask you some questions and then maybe you can do us a quick favor and introduce us to your village. The 3 youths exchanged glances before the girl replied. What do you want to know, sir? The question took Geralt by surprise. He hesitated for a moment as he tried to come up with an answer. They hadn't actually planned this part. We just want to know about your village, he eventually explained. There was no immediate reply, so Elias took the opportunity to lean down and ask his own question. Do you worship any strange gods that command you to murder outsiders or eat human flesh? No, we have a small shrine to Terver, the blonde boy answered slowly. He had obviously been taken aback by the question, and now everyone was looking at Elias weirdly. What kind of stupid question was that? Beardy asked the other bandit. An important one, Elias replied defensively. Do you want to be eaten by cannibals? Before anyone else could speak up, Blacknail stepped forward and asked his own question. Do you have cheese? The bandits had run out days ago and Blacknail dearly missed the taste. This time it was the girl that replied. A little. We have a few goats, although the last cow died a couple years back. There was an exasperated sigh from Beardy, and before the hobgoblin could respond to the girl, Geralt had glared at him. Oh right, he wasn't supposed to be talking. Why had he agreed to that, again? Without any more interruptions, Geralt had interrogated the captives about their village. They were reluctant to talk about certain things, but soon a clear picture of the fortified community began to appear. It seems like a half-decent place to get some supplies and maybe spend a night, Geralt had observed. They have empty homes and they don't sound like a bunch of paranoid bastards we can't trust. Most the other bandits agreed and they soon came to a decision. They would risk trying to contact the village and seeing if they could spend the night there. Blacknail went along with it mostly because it sounded much more exciting than staying out in the forest, plus they had cheese. Let's grab these younglings and get moving then, Beardy remarked impatiently. I volunteer to guard the girl on the way over, Elias said as he leered her way. As if, Greenhorn. I'll do that, an older bandit remarked. I'll watch her, Blacknail said as he stepped closer to the blonde girl. Why? I thought you weren't into that. Into what? Blacknail asked as he blinked in confusion. Why couldn't the humans just make sense? You know, the older bandit replied as he made several crude finger gestures. Blacknail stared blankly at him. He had no idea what the bandit was trying to get at, so he just clarified his own thoughts. I'm much faster and a better guard than any of you, and the other two little people smell horrible. Ah, that makes sense, the bandit said as the two boys gave Blacknail hostile looks. Humans could be weirdly sensitive about their smell even though their noses were barely functional. The girl looked frightened by all the sudden attention. The captives had calmed down somewhat once it became apparent they weren't about to be assaulted and murdered, but they were still on edge. You should probably stay back and keep watch. You're our best scout after all, Geralt had quickly interjected before lowering his voice to a whisper and continuing. And you promised to stay away from the captives. They can't learn that you're a hobgoblin. This caused Blacknail to snort in annoyance, but he didn't argue the point. Without a word, he moved to the back of the group as they got moving. The captives were in the middle of the party as they made their way back up the trail and towards the village. The three youths weren't the only nervous ones, though. Most the bandits looked uncertain and moved stiffly. Approaching the village was something they had to do, but it was also dangerous. They didn't know exactly what they would find there. Soon enough, they reached the edge of the woods and began crossing the clearing and the worked earth within it. Ahead of them, the settlement wall made up of wooden stakes loomed. Its hostile presence informing everyone that the village was prepared to defend itself from outsiders. Hearts and homes too. As they approached the wall in front of them, none of the bandits had their weapons out. They had taken pains to make themselves as presentable as possible after spending so long hiking through the forest. It hadn't really worked. They still looked exactly like what they were, a pack of desperate bandits that sane people should avoid. The captured youths that were now being herded by the bandits had said that there wasn't usually a lookout on duty at the gate, just a guard, and that seemed to be true. Blacknail's group got right to the entrance before they were noticed. Geralt had opened his mouth to shout for attention when he was interrupted by a spiel of swearing from the other side. That was quickly followed by the hidden man there yelling for backup and crying for the village to take up arms. This already could have gone better, Beardy commented. Let's run while we still have the chance, Elias muttered fearfully. Just let me do all the talking and we'll be fine, Geralt had said as they waited for someone in the village to take charge. He didn't sound too convincing. It took a few minutes for that to happen, but eventually a gruff voice addressed them from the other side of the gate. Who are you and what are doing with those children? We are just some lost travelers who happened to stumble upon your humble abode here and thought to introduce ourselves, Geralt had replied politely. We mean you no harm, and we certainly wouldn't harm any children. We encountered them in the woods and thought maybe we could ask them some questions about your village. We were just curious and they're here with us now because I thought you'd want them to come home after all this commotion. There was a disbelieving huff from the hidden man. So you'll let them go at any time? Of course, although they can't exactly go inside as long as this gate is closed. Then how about you back up and leave them here? That would hardly be very gracious on your part, and speaking of manners, you haven't introduced yourself. I'm Tannen, the headsman of this village. Other than a silver-tongued liar, who are you supposed to be? My name is Geralt Rodias, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Tannen. Why don't you open this gate so that we can talk properly? I assure you that we mean you no harm. There was no reply for a few seconds, but then Geralt had to step back as the wooden gate in front of him swung open. On the other side there were about 24 burly men armed with various improvised weapons, including wood axes and pitchforks. All of them were wearing the rough homespun clothing that most peasants wore. Standing out front was an older man with thick arms and a long grey beard. His head was balding and thin of hair, but his eyes were full of fierce energy. Now, Geralt, how about you let the children come over and you tell us what is it that you really want, the man asked in Tannen's voice. The bandits glanced at each other nervously but didn't draw their weapons. We weren't really holding them, so of course they can leave, Geralt replied as he signaled to the men behind him, who stepped aside. The three youths promptly ran away from the bandits and joined the villagers. The headsman relaxed slightly when they reached him, but he quickly shushed them and pushed them back behind his men where they were out of the way. See, we aren't here to hurt anyone. We only want to have a friendly conversation, Geralt had said as he smiled politely. We don't get many visitors here and I have a low tolerance for bullshit, so why don't you get right to the point and tell me exactly what you want, Tannen replied. Fair enough. My companions and I are traveling east, but we need to avoid the main road. We want to buy supplies, get directions, and rest here for the night. Tannen's eyes narrowed as he studied Geralt. And why should we let you in or deal with your kind at all? We could just close this gate and you'd be forced to leave. It's a nice wall, but it's hardly a real guarantee of protection. Besides, if you're going to be that inhospitable to everyone that passes by, then eventually you are going to anger someone. Such a person or group might stick around to cause problems for you, and I really doubt you would want them spreading news of your community around when they do leave. You'd be better off staying on their good side and getting something out of dealing with them. Ha, how do you propose to pay us for our goods? We have coin and a few extra small blades we could trade. Isolated as you are, I doubt you have much in the way of spare iron here. I might be able to arrange the things you want, but if we did let you inside, what guarantee do I have that you'll behave? You all seem to be armed to the teeth, and that concerns me more than a little. There aren't enough of us to attack this settlement, and making enemies out of you would only come back to bite us. We have every reason to stay friendly. As the armed villagers watched the bandits, Geralt and the village headsman continued their talk for several long minutes. A dozen more armed villagers arrived to join their fellows, but Tannen's expression grew less hostile and angry over time, and he eventually decided to let the bandits in, and they began to bargain about the price. Things grew slightly heated when Tannen ordered the bandits to hand over their weapons, but Geralt didn't back down. Even armed, we are still too outnumbered to take this village, but without our blades we stand no chance at all of defending ourselves if you decide to just rob us instead of sticking to your word, he argued. Tannen was unhappy with that line of reasoning but eventually conceded the point. Fine, I'll show where you can bunk up and I'll arrange to see what we can sell you. You'll be under guard though, so don't wander around or cause trouble, the village headsman said. Black Nail thought he detected a sly slant to his smile but didn't know what to make of it. Geralt nodded in acceptance and grinned triumphantly to himself. There were sighs of relief as the bandits began following the villagers deeper into the settlement. It seemed like a fight had been avoided, but as Black Nail fell in behind the bandits, Geralt had turned and whispered his way. You should sneak away now, Black Nail. The goblins shouldn't be left alone and you can meet up with us after dark. I'm sure you can make it into the village and find us without being detected. His words sounded a bit too much like orders to Black Nail, so the hobgoblin scowled. I'm the leader and think I should stay here, and instead you should go meet up with the goblins. Yes, you're the leader, but they're still suspicious of us, and with your hood up you stand out. You can't hide your skin color from them, and if the villagers do turn against us, then you're the only one who could sneak in and free us. That argument didn't sit well with Black Nail. He wanted to stay closer to the cheese, but he had to admit Geralt had several good points. He grunted in aggravation and then quickly spun around. Black Nail was only a few steps from the gate, and it took him but a moment to slip back outside the wall. Several bandits were between him and the villagers, so none of them noticed him leave. The cloaked hobgoblin crept around the outside of the wall for a bit, to avoid any watchers, before sprinting across the fields and towards the forest. He would be back when it got darker. The sound of singing birds could be heard from up in the treetops overhead, as Black Nail trudged through the bush. It was a fair walk back to where he had left the goblins, but after a few minutes some of the bushes up ahead shook and a familiar pair of goblins scampered out. It was Scamp and Imp was still hauling his heavy backpack around. They must have been waiting for Black Nail to leave the village and decided to meet up with him. Where are the others? Black Nail asked them. None of the feral goblins had appeared. Scamp immediately threw a look back over his shoulder and a confused frown appeared on his ugly green face. It seemed like he hadn't even noticed that the ferals weren't around until just then. On the other hand, Imp just gave the hobgoblin a calm knowing look that irritated Black Nail. They left to follow a smell. Gob looked angry, Imp explained. He didn't seem too concerned, but then again he never did. They're not very nice, so we stayed to wait for you, boss. You're much better than them, Scamp added helpfully. This news didn't please Black Nail. Not only was he supposed to keep a watch on the goblins, but Gob had acted without permission. This is what Black Nail had been afraid of and why hobgoblins couldn't be trusted. He could only hope Gob wasn't leading a raid on the human settlement at this very moment. He should have dealt with the other hobgoblin days ago. What way did they go? The hobgoblin asked. Both the goblins immediately pointed in completely different directions. Black Nail groaned and rubbed his eyes. This was dumb. Was he going to have to go all the way back to the place he'd last seen Gob and track him from there? That would be a waste of his time and he probably didn't have much left. They went off into the forest away from the humans, Imp added, which caused Scamp to nod along. Both the goblins dropped their arms. That was an important bit of news. Imp was undoubtedly the smarter of the pair. Which way did they go again? Black Nail asked as he got ready to move. Unsurprisingly, the goblins pointed in different directions again, but this time Scamp was clearly pointing far to the left of his last choice, while Imp's orientation hadn't changed. That way it is, Black Nail grumbled as he broke out into a quick jog in the direction Imp had indicated. The goblins followed him as he cut through the forest and headed deeper into the woods. It took the hobgoblin a few minutes to stumble upon the feral goblin's trail. Imp had apparently been right. They had made a lot of tracks and disturbed the forest. Black Nail picked up speed as he followed the signs and started running, but even then it took him over half an hour before he found anything. As the hobgoblin jumped over a fallen log he spotted the missing goblins. They were all crouched behind a clump of bushes and peering through the branches. Black Nail snarled as he saw Gob in the center of the group. He drew his sword and stalked toward the other hobgoblin. How dare he disobey an order? The noise drew Gob's attention. He looked over his shoulder and then flinched in terror at the sight of Black Nail closing in on him. What are you doing? Black Nail hissed angrily. He didn't appreciate having to run so much. Enemy goblin, Gob quickly replied as he lurched to his feet. There was an uncertain look on his face as he met Black Nail's gaze, but then he turned away to look through the bush again. Black Nail took a second to follow his stare. Whatever was there must be important, or this was some sort of trick. Up ahead the forest ended and gave way to a series of low rocky hills. Only a few scraggly trees spotted their desolate surface. The terrain on the way here had been uneven and steep, so the area they were in now was hidden away within a low valley that was surrounded by tall peaks covered in greenery. At first, Black Nail didn't notice anything special about the place, other than all the rocks, but then something caught his eye. He ignored Gob and came to a stop. There was a post at the bottom of one of the rocky hills, and a human skull had been placed atop of it. Its empty eye sockets stared out into the forest. Colored feathers had been jammed into gaps in the wood and weird symbols had been carved into the post below the bleached bones. Half the symbols looked like crudely drawn genitalia, so this was probably the work of feral goblins. Goblins attack goblin. Follow here, Gob explained. I see, Black Nail mumbled to himself before glancing back at his hobgoblin minion. He understood what had happened now. One of the goblins he had sent out to scout must have stumbled upon a goblin from another pack. The two had fought and then things had naturally escalated until Gob had decided to raid the enemy himself and slaughter them all. That left Black Nail with only one real option, total war. These goblins were his minions even if he didn't really want them, so an attack on them was an attack on him, as well as a good excuse to have some fun. Besides, it was only a bit past noon now. It wouldn't be dark for hours, and Black Nail didn't want to sit around and wait. Geralt had wanted Black Nail to keep the goblins out of trouble, but he probably wouldn't care about something like a small tribal war, or ever even know about it. Who would tell him? Most of the goblins couldn't talk and Scamp was an idiot who rarely remembered anything that wasn't beaten into him repeatedly over a long period of time. The problem was that post. It wasn't something you would expect a small tribe to make, and Gob only had half a dozen goblins with him. The post was also too tall for a goblin to have placed that skull there alone, and teamwork was unlikely. Thus, it was most likely the work of a hobgoblin, and that would also explain Gob's aggressive behavior. The scent of the other hobgoblin must have enraged him. You're lucky I showed up, Black Nail told Gob as he sheathed his sword. You're kind of runty for a hobgoblin, and it's stupid to attack an enemy in their own territory without a plan. Black Nail grinned to himself as he stepped through the bushes and began walking over to the post. He was still feeling angry, but now he had a new target to focus on, one he didn't have to hold back against. His hood was down and his hobgoblin features were plainly visible as he strode out into the clearing. The rule about walking into enemy territory didn't apply to him. He was special. Almost immediately there was a reaction. 24 goblins rose from hiding places atop the nearby hills and out from behind rocks. They growled menacingly and their ugly green faces were scrunched up into vicious snarls as they grabbed stones and raised them in preparation to throw. Black Nail calmly watched a single stony projectile zoom his way, but it fell short and rolled harmlessly to a stop at his feet. With an amused grin, he then scooped the rock up and pulled out his sling. A twirl of the weapon sent the projectile straight back at its original thrower. It hit the surprised goblin right between eyes with a loud thud and knocked it unconscious. The other goblins fell silent as they watched their companion roll down the side of the hill. Now what will you do? Black Nail mused as he looked around for the enemy leader. He still hadn't shown himself. Gob and his goblins stepped out of the bushes and took up position behind Black Nail. The enemy goblins were starting to look afraid now. Nothing happened for several long moments as the two groups stared at each other, and Black Nail began to grow impatient. If the enemy wasn't going to show himself, then Black Nail would force his hand. The hobgoblin drew in a deep breath and then bellowed as loudly as he could. The unexpected blast of sound startled everyone, but as soon as Black Nail fell silent, an answering roar rose into the air as the enemy hobgoblin finally stepped out from behind a large jagged boulder and into sight. Striking yellow eyes filled with hate glared at Black Nail from atop a long crooked nose. The hobgoblin was bulky and taller than any other hobgoblin Black Nail had seen before, but his two horns were short and straight. Several long pale scars decorated his skin. He was dressed in dirty rags that could only have once been human clothing, and he was holding a rusty axe. It was clearly a woodsman's axe and its edge had dulled from neglect, but it still looked dangerous. The hobgoblin's appearance caused Black Nail to smile hungrily to himself. Black Nail was still outnumbered and in hostile territory, but it had been a while since he'd had an opportunity to let loose. This looked like it was going to be fun, and deliciously bloody. Hearts and homes 3. The swarm of feral goblins glared at Black Nail with hate-filled eyes. More and more of them were slipping into sight from behind rocky hills and grey boulders. Most of them gathered up behind their leader, the yellow-eyed hobgoblin, until there were almost 40 of them. They shook and fidgeted as they worked themselves into a fury and glared at the intruders. In the center of the group, their hobgoblin chieftain watched Black Nail with his bright yellow eyes. He stood confidently but seemed willing to wait. Let's run away, Scamp said as he cowered behind Black Nail. He clearly regretted coming out of the bushes that bordered the forest behind him. Run and I'll make you into a loincloth, Black Nail hissed in reply as he studied the enemy. This wasn't a small tribe at all, and they far outnumbered Black Nail's own paltry force. Even with another hobgoblin to back him up they would quickly be swarmed over by the mob in a straight-up fight. Even a good sword wouldn't stop an angry green wave. Black Nail wasn't too worried, though. It wouldn't come to that, because that wasn't how goblins acted. They were only slightly smarter than humans, but they were far less likely to commit suicide for no real reason. Still, it would be a terrible idea to let the enemy have time or let them think they had the advantage. If they sensed weakness then the wild goblins would attack all together. We're going to charge. Follow me or I'll rip your guts out, Black Nail ordered his followers. He then eyed Gob and made an aggressive gesture that he hoped conveyed his meaning. The other hobgoblin didn't have a great understanding of how to talk. What? Scamp asked disbelievingly. Instead of responding, Black Nail drew his sword and launched himself forward. Another roar echoed out from his throat as he closed the distance between himself and his target. Die, you snotty runts, he yelled at the top of his lungs. The enemy goblins flinched in surprise. Instinctively, they huddled closer together for a moment for safety. The yellow-eyed hobgoblin froze for a split second but then quickly raised his axe. This didn't faze Black Nail. He grinned savagely as he dove forward. Meanwhile, the masked goblins realized who Black Nail's target was. The sudden noise and the attack startled them. Caught off guard, they didn't have time to do anything but react. Screeching filled the air as the goblins dove away from the charging hobgoblin. It was one thing for them to seek safety in numbers from an enemy but it was something completely different to place themselves directly between two fighting hobgoblins. Black Nail didn't waste this opportunity. He attacked the exposed enemy leader. However, one of the fleeing goblins was too slow, and didn't manage to get out of the way in time. Black Nail kicked him aside before stepping forward and slashing at the yellow-eyed hobgoblin. There was a loud thud as the hobgoblin pivoted away from the attack and knocked the sword blade aside with a swing of his axe. The blade bit into the wooden shaft but didn't do much damage and bounced back. The startled mass of goblins flinched away from the fighting like rippling water and dissolved into chaos. They didn't know what to do. Their leader tried to step back and strike at Black Nail, but he was too slow. Black Nail growled and lunged forward at the same moment. Both their weapons were still locked together. A shimmer of fear flashed in the hobgoblin's yellow eyes and he was forced to step back as Black Nail leaned forward and snapped at him. Black Nail's teeth closed on empty air but the action startled everyone. You're a big fish in a small pond, very small, Black Nail hissed through his teeth as he stared at his surprised opponent. A few enemy goblins that Black Nail had scattered decided to act despite their fear. 3 of them jumped at him from the side, but that was when Gob joined the fight. With fists swinging wildly he waded into the fight and assaulted any of the goblins that tried to get close to Black Nail. The smaller fighters screeched as they were pushed aside by this new threat and then Gob's own minions rushed in to support him. The melee descended into chaos. One goblin did manage to get through, and Black Nail had to take a second to kick it away. This gave the enemy hobgoblin time to recover but Black Nail didn't care. He just laughed manically as he turned back to face his opponent. The fearful goblins tried to stay out of their way. You have no idea what I am. You don't know how afraid you should be. Black Nail laughed as he raised his blade. The cloak draped over his shoulders rippled as he moved. It felt good to let his emotions out after controlling himself around humans for so long. Out here their rules no longer applied to him. He was free. The uncomprehending feral hobgoblin simply hissed and sputtered angrily in response. He didn't know what Black Nail had just said but the confidence he was projecting appeared to worry him. A shimmer of fear had appeared in his eyes, but instead of trying to retreat he attacked again. The yellow-eyed hobgoblin raised his axe up and swung it straight down at Black Nail. The blow didn't connect. A metallic ringing noise rang out as Black Nail parried the attack. He then stepped forward and slugged his yellow-eyed opponent in the face. There was a wet crack as the hobgoblin fell over backwards. His long green nose was now bent at an awkward angle and his eyes were wide with pain and surprise. A nearby goblin saw an opportunity and jumped at Black Nail from behind. He was gripping a large sharp rock in one hand. Black Nail saw him coming, turned, grabbed his arm, and then used the goblin's own momentum to toss him through the air and over a nearby pile of rock. Several other nearby goblins watched with impressed looks on their faces. The yellow-eyed hobgoblin once again tried to catch Black Nail off guard. From where he had fallen on the ground, he whistled sharply, and then a goblin that had been hanging back out of the fight rushed forward and tossed something his way. The yellow-eyed hobgoblin caught the javelin out of the air, and then he whipped it at Black Nail's head as he jumped to his feet. The projectile zoomed past Black Nail's face as he leaned out of the way. It all happened in a single instant, but Black Nail noticed that something had been smeared across the tip of the weapon. It was probably some sort of poison, and Black Nail made a mental note to watch out for such tricks. The enemy hobgoblin hissed in disappointment when his surprise attack failed. He reached down to pick up his fallen axe, but Black Nail didn't give him time to take a defensive stance. He extended the momentum of his dodge into a quick spin that ended with a slash of his sword. I'm bloody magic. Black Nail hissed as his blade sliced into his opponent's shoulder. I have killed beasts and men far more dangerous than you. The cut wasn't that deep but the pain made the enemy hobgoblin gasp and waver. Black Nail had no mercy. It was time to end this farce of a fight. He unleashed a flurry of attacks that leapt past his enemy's defenses and drew blood. His opponent stumbled again so Black Nail slashed at his eyes. The enemy immediately ducked down out of the way but the attack had been a feint. As the yellow-eyed hobgoblin dropped, Black Nail's booted foot smashed into his groin. There was a shrill squeak and a pop as the enemy hobgoblin's eyes crossed and he collapsed. He looked like he was in a lot of pain so Black Nail helped him out. Before he had even hit the ground, Black Nail swung his sword around in an arc and the tip of his blade ripped the hobgoblin's throat out. "Ouchie," Scamp remarked from the edge of the fighting. There were groans and gasps of shock from many of the other goblins and all of them immediately stopped fighting. They all stared at the victor of the duel uncertainly. Black Nail took a moment to stomp on his fallen opponent's body and end the annoying gargling sound it was making before turning to meet the gaze of the onlookers. "All of you. Big goblins and small ones, you have no idea what lurks outside your territory, the things I have seen. You are all so petty and stupid, just beasts that live in the dirt," Black Nail said as sneered at the nearby goblins. They cowered and shifted nervously under his vicious gaze. Their fear amused Black Nail. "That's kind of mean," Scamp remarked. Black Nail ignored him since he was too far away to kick and that would ruin his moment. The joy of victory had lifted Black Nail's spirits. All his previous doubts were as nothing. Why had he even cared about such stupid things? He was full of confidence and energy. He could do anything. "I am the greatest of hobgoblins. A chief among chiefs." Black Nail screamed triumphantly as he stomped on his fallen foe's body a few more times. Conquest felt good. A lot of Herod's old actions made more sense now. He should do this more often. No one interrupted Black Nail, but after a few minutes standing around and gloating to a bunch of goblins got boring, so Black Nail stepped away from the yellow-eyed goblin's corpse and looked around. An eager gob walked over to Black Nail and gibbered something before motioning towards the nearby hills. He was practically vibrating with energy and his eyes were wide with excitement. "You're right, gob. Let's go see what I've conquered," Black Nail replied as he began to walk over to the nearest hill. There had to be a lair around here somewhere. As he searched the hills for a cave or crevice, the defeated goblins began to disperse. It was clear now that Black Nail wasn't going to try and slaughter them all right this instant, so they had things to do. One smallish local goblin with a bluish tint to her skin hesitantly wandered over to one hill and called out to Black Nail. When the hobgoblin looked over, she pointed towards an opening. She was obviously trying to get on Black Nail's good side by being his guide. That was fine with Black Nail. Closer inspection of the opening revealed a dark crevice that the yellow-eyed hobgoblin had apparently been using as his personal chamber. It was big enough to hold a dozen goblins, but it looked and smelled like only the hobgoblin had slept here. There were few items stashed around the place, but nothing more interesting than a few yellow rocks. Once he was done looking that cave over, Black Nail's guide led him to several other small caves that were being used by the goblins. None of them caught Black Nail's attention, but as they were walking, other local goblins approached him to offer the conquering hobgoblin tribute. Black Nail took most the berries and fresh meat for himself but passed the shiny stones and other such things to Gob. He had enough of that sort of stuff already. The last cave he was led to was different from the others. The entrance was at the bottom of a hole near the post, and it took a second to climb down. This cave was much larger than all the others and didn't look like the goblins had used it much. It was wide and extended deep into the ground until it ended at a pile of rubble. It looked like there had been a cave-in at some point. Unfortunately, it was hard to make out the details since it was too dark even for goblin eyes to see clearly inside. One small section of the wall did contain a bit of the yellow metal that humans liked, though. Once Black Nail had completed his inspection, he walked over to the tallest hill and took a seat atop of it. From there he could see everything in the rocky area and the forest beyond it. He was no longer feeling quite so euphoric, but his mind felt clearer than it had during the march north. Gob and several goblins waited for him at the bottom as Black Nail began to think. Gob knelt there reverently and a few of the goblins copied him, although most of them just sat down. Now Black Nail was the chieftain of another bunch of goblins. Did that matter? Was that what he wanted? The joy of shedding blood and destroying his enemies had begun to fade. Taking this place had been fun, but staying here seemed boring. It couldn't compare to being a part of Herod's band. These were just goblins. There was no cedar here, no sense of home. Black Nail's memories still tugged at his heart. He had things to do, even if he didn't know exactly what it was he had to do or how to do it. The sky overhead had begun to darken as the sun fell toward the western horizon, and Black Nail sighed. It was time to get back to the human village and the bandits. Who knew what sort of trouble they had gotten themselves into without him around? Black Nail took a few moments to explain to Gob that he was now in charge of everything while Black Nail was gone and that he didn't want to be followed. Gob appeared to reluctantly accept this command, so Black Nail left everyone behind and sprinted off into the woods. Black Nail ran at a fast pace that soon left him out of breath, because he didn't want to take too long or be out in the forest when darkness fell. That was when things got truly dangerous. As he ran, Black Nail realized that he could just leave Gob and the others behind now and they would never bother him again. That was an idea worth considering. The goblins were more than a little annoying. After about half an hour, the hobgoblin reached the village and its tall wooden walls came into sight. No ravenous beasts or monsters blocked his way. After waiting a few more aggravating minutes for the sun to set a little more and for the night to grow darker, Black Nail crept out of the bushes at the edge of the clearing and stalked across the empty fields. He reached the wall without incident and listened carefully for any sign of watchers before choosing a deserted-looking section of the wall to climb over. He took off his boots and his claws made the ascent simple. They dug into the softwood and easily found purchase. The village was largely quiet. Before proceeding, Black Nail took a moment to pull his hood up and put his boots back on. There didn't seem to be much in the way of late afternoon activity here, unlike in larger human settlements such as Dagger Point. Black Nail moved cautiously and kept to the shadows as he searched for Geralt and the others. He hoped they hadn't all been killed. He already had enough dead humans to avenge, more important ones. The village only had 30 or 40 buildings of various sizes, so it didn't take the hobgoblin too long to find his first clue to his quarry's location. Several armed villagers were standing out in the middle of one section of the street and watching 3 nearby homes. Black Nail was pretty sure he knew what that meant, so he slipped into an alley and circled around to the back of the buildings. Once in the dark and tight space between the homes where no one could see him, the sound of conversation drew Black Nail's attention. He snuck up to a ground story window and listened. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Master Tannen," Geralt had said. "Ha, there is no need for stuffy titles out here, lad. I'm just another villager, and not a master of anything but myself," Tannen replied. "Still I'm grateful. Feel free, graciousness is never unwanted, however let's talk about something more important. You seem like a bright young man, so I bet you're wondering why I let you all in. You're clearly not just a bunch of lost travelers, not armed like that you're not. We have no intention of causing trouble. I'm not saying you do. The truth of the matter is that you're hardly the first bunch of miscreants to wander by, although you're the largest yet." Black Nail took a chance and peered through the window for a second. There was a small room on the other side, and no one was looking his way. Tannen and Geralt were both seated at a small table across from each other. And what happened to those people, may I ask?" Geralt asked nervously. Tannen laughed loudly in amusement and slapped his thighs. "Nothing too terrible, lad. I'm one of them. Anyone who wanders out in this direction has reasons to want to stay out of sight, and this settlement is always looking for more manpower. If that's an invitation to take up residence here we will have to decline. Several of our group are looking forward to getting back to civilization." "Ah, that's too bad. You seem like a useful person to have around. I'll let you think about it overnight and discuss it with your companions," Tannen replied jovially as he stood up and pushed his chair aside. As Black Nail squatted in the alley and listened, a realization crystallized in his head. It had been nagging at him for weeks but only now was it clear. He didn't want to go to Dagger Point. There was nothing for him there. Events had been forcing Black Nail to react and do what other people wanted. That was going to end. It was time he figured out what he really wanted and how he was going to get it. In the shadows, the hobgoblin began to plan. Hearts and homes for. Of course, the problem was all the humans. Their weird mental issues really complicated Black Nail's plans. The tight alley was dark and shadowy as the hobgoblin leaned against the side of the building he had just been spying into. It seemed unlikely that anyone would stumble his way, so he had plenty of time to think. What did Black Nail want for himself? Food? Shiny things? No, he wanted to kill Warwick. Black Nail's mouth began to water whenever he thought about it. The memories of Cedar's last moments were still fresh in Black Nail's mind, and they demanded action. Blood had to be paid with blood, but killing Warwick would be very difficult and dangerous. None of the survivors of Herod's camp were anything like Cedar. Black Nail had traveled with the humans for a while now but it hadn't filled the hole in his heart. Going to Dagger Point wouldn't satisfy him at all. His master couldn't be replaced by anyone else. It was pointless to try. Only vengeance was left to him. Warwick would be difficult to kill, though. He was a powerful vessel and he had a horde of minions. Being sneaky wouldn't be enough, which meant Black Nail needed more power, and the easiest way to get that was by increasing the size of his tribe. Warwick had a large army so Black Nail needed one too. Unfortunately, while that idea was very appealing, it would be hard to actually accomplish. After observing his human minions for a while Black Nail had come to the troubling conclusion that most of them didn't like having him in charge. Even though he had done such a great job as their leader and saved their lives too many times to count they didn't trust him, and it was obviously because he was a hobgoblin. What a bunch of stupid herd animals. Black Nail sighed as doubt clouded his mind. There was no way he was ever going to build a human army the way Herod or Warwick had. Being the strongest wasn't enough. Did that mean his goal was impossible? Maybe he was just thinking about this the wrong way. What if he thought about this like it was a hunt? Yes, that could work. He had certain tools available and it was all about using them correctly in order to corner his quarry. Most of the tools were humans, and they were defined by their fear and their greed. Controlling them was simply a matter of introducing the right type of motivation at the right time. He also had some other tools available, like the goblins, even if they were useless for anything that required an attention span of over a minute. After going over his options for a while Black Nail was forced to take a break. The pieces weren't falling into place. He had hit a mental wall and while he had been thinking night had fallen around him. It was almost pitch black outside now. The only noise was from far-off nightbirds and the occasionally rustle of a rat moving through the garbage behind the hobgoblin. Time to sleep. I can think later, Black Nail yawned. He then turned and climbed through the nearby window that led into the home Geralt was using. The room on the other side was lit by a single flickering candle. Geralt was still sitting in his chair at the table, but it looked like he had fallen asleep. He was slumped over and his chest rose and fell slowly as a quiet whistling sound issued forth from his mouth. Black Nail walked over and poked him on the cheek. Ah, what? The man exclaimed in surprise as his now wide-open eyes jerked around the room before focusing on Black Nail. It's just me, be quiet, the hobgoblin replied as Geralt visibly relaxed. Oh, Black Nail, it's you. I was waiting for you, but I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to show up tonight. I had stuff to do, Black Nail said as he looked around the room and then peered through a doorway into the bedroom beyond. Well, I was talking to Tannen, this village's headsman, and it doesn't seem like they're going to trick or attack us. Yes, I heard. If you were there then why didn't you come in earlier? There was someone coming so I had to leave, Black Nail lied smoothly as he walked into the bedroom and stared down at the bed that was up against the far wall. He walked over to it and began ruffling up the blankets. Actually, I was planning on sleeping there, Geralt muttered after getting up and talking to the doorway. Black Nail ignored him and sat down on the bed. The hobgoblin's mouth stretched wide open as he yawned. I guess I'll just use the smaller bed in the next room, Geralt said. He sounded quite annoyed, but Black Nail didn't care. Did anything important happen while I was gone? You humans keep getting into trouble. Nothing much, except what I already told you. The plan is that we take a day off to buy whatever we can and rest our feet. We can leave for Daggerpoint the next day. There was a creaking noise from the bed as Black Nail leaned over sideways, so he was lying down. He kept his eyes on Geralt and scowled slightly out of irritation. He was still the leader, so he was the one who got to decide when they would leave, although another day to think up his own plan would probably be enough. While Geralt was here, Black Nail decided to ask him some questions. He had heard the man discuss something interesting with Tannen, and maybe a human's point of view would help the hobgoblin. Geralt was the most human-like human Black Nail knew. He was slow to react, confused about everything, and loved saying pointless things that barely made sense. I give you all permission to do that, but I have some questions. Oh, what do you want to know? Tannen asked you if you wanted to stay out here in this village, Black Nail pointed out. Ah, that. You don't have to worry about any of us wanting to stay out here. Only a few of our band would ever be open to that. Staying out here in the wilds isn't a very appealing choice. This place is just a bunch of dirty shacks. I'm a city man myself and I can't wait to get back to civilization, where people bathe and women have less facial hair. What's the first thing you want to do when you get to the city? Black Nail asked. He wanted to understand the humans' motivations a little better. That's easy. I want to hit up a tavern and purchase a hot meal and a hot bath. It will cost more than few coins, but it will be worth it. That's probably what most the band will do. We still have a fair bit of silver between us, but we can't spend it out here, Geralt laughed. This answer greatly interested Black Nail. There was a new cheery shine to his eyes as he replied. Which minions do you think want to get back to a human city the most? Geralt laughed again before replying. He seemed to enjoy discussing the topic and thinking about civilization. While he was talking, Black Nail took a second to match names to faces and remember how much he liked those people. The hobgoblin and the man talked for a few more minutes before Black Nail yawned again and let Geralt go. By that time, Black Nail had gotten the inspiration he had wanted. When he was alone, Black Nail took off his boots and coat. He curled up on his bed and smiled to himself before closing his eyes. He had a plan now. The hunt was on. The next morning Black Nail got up before the sunrise. He got dressed and slipped out of the house before Geralt was awake. While the other bandits were exploring the village and getting ready to the next day, he was making his own preparations. He ran through the forest and back to the goblin's lair where Gob was. When the rocky hills that concealed the caves below came into sight, several goblins that were climbing over them immediately noticed Black Nail and one of them let out a trumpeting screech. A few seconds later, Gob hurried into sight and approached Black Nail. You are back, great chief. Command me, Gob said as he gave a quick respectful bow. Yes, your amazing leader is here, Black Nail replied as he stared appraisingly at Gob. Having another hobgoblin around had originally annoyed Black Nail to no end. There was just something wrong and dangerous about it, but after careful consideration he had decided that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages. Black Nail turned to look at the nearby goblins who were wandering around the clearing. This tribe was a lot bigger than Gob's old one. Black Nail wasn't even sure how many of them there were, but there were at least 50. Several different groups of various sizes lived in the nearby caves. The plan Black Nail had come up with last night would only work if he could somehow turn this chaotic goblin tribe into a useful force that would follow orders. It was going to be very hard, but Black Nail had a few good ideas that might work, and since he was the smartest hobgoblin in the entire world, if anyone could do it then it was him. After collecting his thoughts for a moment, Black Nail began giving orders to Gob. A primitive camp like the one here wouldn't do. A more secure base had to be built and provided with a steady supply of food. In order for all that to happen the goblins here had to be brought to heel, so the first thing Black Nail ordered Gob to do was to select a group of loyal followers he could stalk and force into obedience. Once they had been beaten into submission they were to be taught how to use traps and stone tools. Loyal lieutenants could be selected from their ranks which in turn would bring more goblins under Black Nail's control. Black Nail was too busy and important to do that himself. Can I rejoin the humans now? I want to see Geralt, Scamp whined as he wandered over and interrupted Black Nail's conversation. Imp was right behind Scamp but he just watched the proceedings with his usual inscrutable expression. No, they don't want you, Black Nail replied scornfully. That's not true. They pet me and give me tons of treats. They are with other humans who don't like goblins, so you have to stay here. Not fair. Shut up before I throw a rock at you, Black Nail threatened as he glared at the goblin. I hate it here, everyone is so mean and the food sucks, Scamp muttered as he turned to leave. I didn't say you could go, Black Nail added as he reached down and grabbed Scamp's shoulder. The surprised goblin said as he stared at Black Nail in confusion. You know a lot of human tricks, so help out or I'll string your puny body up from a tree by your slobbery little tongue. Herding goblins was a difficult task, and before Black Nail had accomplished all that much the day began to approach its end. That meant it was time to get back to Geralt and the others. Black Nail took a moment to stretch himself out before heading back into the forest. As he ran, the hobgoblin considered the next step of his plan. About an hour later he arrived back at the village. He got there without a problem and easily snuck back inside. Going over the wall was easy in the dark. However, instead of visiting Geralt again Black Nail snuck around the town and met up with a few of the other bandits. He talked to them for several hours before slipping back into the house Geralt was using and going to sleep. The morning of departure came and found Black Nail leading the way towards Dagger Point. The sky was still dark overhead and the forest was a maze of shadows. They had left the village at the break of dawn to avoid unnecessary attention. There was no wind but the early morning storm of birdsong was at full force. Ha, I can't wait to get to Dagger Point. I know we still have a long way to go, but it seems like we're almost there to me, a short bandit with dark hair and a mustache announced happily. He was following right behind Black Nail. Don't say that. Now you just know some horrible beast is going to jump out of the bushes and attack, a taller bandit with fair hair replied. Oh, don't worry. That's not going to happen, Black Nail replied before chuckling to himself. There was a brief pause before the fair-haired bandit spoke up. You're unusually talkative today, Black Nail. It's a good day. Don't you agree? The hobgoblin asked as he smiled at the man. I can't argue against that. It certainly seems like it's going to be better than I thought it would. I'm definitely richer than yesterday. There were only 4 men and Black Nail within sight. The hobgoblin was leading the way as they walked between a maze of tall trees. The earth was dark and soft where it was visible between the short broad-leaved plants that dotted the ground. Are you sure no one is going to catch up to us? Elias asked nervously as he looked back over his shoulder. Yes, we aren't following the same path as before and none of them are trackers, Black Nail answered. Some of the villagers could be half-decent woodsmen, the mustached bandit pointed out. They're just humans, and I would hear them if they got close. As long as you're with me you don't need to worry about anything else, Black Nail replied. That's right, they're just a dumb bunch of peasants. The inbred dirt famers probably never leave their shacks, and we've got Black Nail with us. He has proven that he knows what he's doing. I definitely have a plan, Black Nail agreed. It was nice to finally get some proper appreciation. The group of 5 bandits hiked through the forest for several hours. The sun rose in the sky until its light shone straight noon through the branches overhead. Up ahead, Black Nail spotted a hill through the trees. It wasn't a particularly tall mound but there was plenty of room to sit on top of it and it was nice and dry. A small creek with a rocky bottom ran through the trees and passed by the bottom of the hill. The bubbling water looked clear and clean. This looks like a good place to stop. There's a creek right there. I'll make stew, Black Nail announced as he put his pack down. Do we have time for that? We should probably keep moving, the mustached bandit replied. It will be quick. I have everything already prepared. I just need to heat the water. Still, we should save the large meal for supper. We can just eat a quick bite of dried trail food right now. I wasn't asking for your advice, Black Nail hissed. He stopped unpacking his bag for a second so that he could glare at the man. I'm stopping to make stew. You can walk off into the woods by yourself if you want. Are you going to do that? No. I'm not. You're the boss, so let's eat, the man admitted reluctantly. He looked more than a little angry at being forced to concede. Normally, this would have annoyed Black Nail but the hobgoblin was in a forgiving mood. Yep, that's me. I'm the leader, the hobgoblin agreed cheerfully as he tried to get a fire started. He had brought a bit of dried firewood with him for this exact purpose. The other bandits settled down to rest as Black Nail began cooking. The hobgoblin took his time and enjoyed the process. He liked the process of throwing ingredients into a pot and boiling it. I have to admit that I was skeptical of your plan when you met with me last night, but it's going perfectly, the fair-haired bandit said. We might actually come out of this horrible trek through the woods with some real gains. I thought that when Harad fell we were doomed. Damn right, another bandit agreed. I just regret not being there to see that Winnie wimp Geralt's face when he realized that we'd run off with everyone's coin and valuables. Split between just the 5 of us there is enough coin to have a proper good time when we get to Dagger Point. This is a plan worthy of a hobgoblin. It's cunning and merciless. I like it, the mustached man added as he grinned. I'm very smart, and I didn't get anything out of guiding a bunch of idiots to Dagger Point. So why would I do it? Black Nail said as he returned their smiles. He was practically blushing now from the unexpected compliments. Elias was silent as Black Nail passed out bowls of stew. He looked uncomfortable but also too nervous to talk. When Black Nail had recruited him for this betrayal it had been less of an offer and more of a threat to disembowel him and choke him to death with his own guts. It was only when Black Nail went back to stirring the pot without handing him any food that he finally spoke up. Where's my bowl? He asked. You don't get any, Black Nail replied as one of the other bandits began coughing. What? Why not? Because I poisoned it, you pink idiot, Black Nail answered as he stood up. The other 2 bandits were both coughing as well now. All 3 were struggling to breath and their eyes were wide with fear. They grasped at their necks in a vain attempt to gasp down some air. One of them managed to struggle to his feet but the other 2 were writhing on the ground. Black Nail drew a knife and walked over to the man who was standing. The bandit desperately flailed in an attempt to keep Black Nail away but the hobgoblin easily dodged the blow and cut the man's throat. That's part 1 of the plan complete. Now for part 2, Black Nail exclaimed happily as the bandits died and Elias watched on with horror. Hearts and Homes 5. The corpse of the man Black Nail had just killed lay on the ground. Blood leaked from his torn open throat. The other 2 men the hobgoblin had poisoned had also stopped choking and gone still. A mere minute ago, they had been talking in a friendly manner with Black Nail, and then the hobgoblin had killed them without mercy or warning. There was a look of complete horrified shock on Elias' face. His eyes were wide with terror as he took a fumbling step back away from Black Nail. Oh gods! What the hells? Have you gone crazy? Are you going to kill me now? I knew this was going to happen, but no one listened to me. Oh gods, why didn't they listen? You're fine, Black Nail reassured his minion. Didn't I tell you about this part of the plan? I thought I had told you. Plan? You can't just kill people. They betrayed the rest of the band, so it's fine. That's the kind of people you're supposed to kill. Harad did it all the time. You were the one that convinced them to do that. You led them out here, so you're just as responsible as them. Don't be silly. I'm the leader, I can't be a traitor. It was a test and they failed, Black Nail replied as he rolled his eyes in a condescending manner. Humans sure could convince themselves of some crazy things. Elias stared slack-jawed at Black Nail. He didn't seem to know what to say at first, but then he opened his mouth. Why did you bring us out here if you were just planning on killing them? It makes no sense. You're insane. It makes lots of sense, too much sense for a minion like you, Black Nail answered. You're here to help me carry things, and I brought them out here because they were in the way of my plan. What plan? Is it to see how many humans you can lure out into the woods and murder? Elias yelled. His voice echoed through the trees. No, that's dumb. That plan is for later. I don't want to kill you humans. You're part of my tribe and I'm trying to help you. By lying to us and poisoning our food. I'm trying to help most of you, the ones that deserve it. Like you, you're a good minion. Aren't you? Black Nail asked as he stared meaningfully at Elias. The human minion got the message. Yes, he responded carefully in much lower voice. Good. Going to Dagger Point through the forest was just a stupid idea. We all would have died, Black Nail replied. Elias was always fun to have around. His reactions were so amusing and he was easy to control with threats. You still haven't explained your plan at all. And I'm not going to right now. There's a lot to do and you need to get to work. Despite the man's obvious reluctance and residual fear, Black Nail ordered Elias to help him move the bodies somewhere out of sight and to gather up their valuables, including all the coins they had stolen from the other bandits. What do you even want all this money for? Elias asked as he picked up the last coin purse. Nothing. I just don't want other people to have it, Black Nail replied. When they were done, the hobgoblin led the way back. Elias had no option but to follow him. They were in the middle of the forest and Elias wasn't anything remotely like a woodsman. Shouldn't we have gotten back by now? Elias asked after a few hours of hiking at a steady pace. He had a large pack on his back and the effort of carrying it had tired him out. His brow was sweaty and he was breathing heavily. We would have reached the village if that was where we were going, Black Nail answered without slowing or turning around. Where are we going? Elias asked in surprise. He didn't sound happy. You'll see soon, Black Nail replied. After only a few more minutes of walking, the pair arrived at the caves where the goblins lived. Gob was standing at the base of one of the hills and supervising a group of goblins. He noticed Black Nail right away and hurried over to meet him. Where did all these goblins come from? Elias asked Black Nail as he looked around. There are a lot more of them here than before. Even goblins don't breed this quickly. I conquered them. It was a great battle. I had to fight a 10-foot-tall hobgoblin with a poison spear, Black Nail replied proudly. Do hobgoblins get that large? Of course. I think I know more about hobgoblins than you, Black Nail replied. All right, but what are we doing here? Why didn't we go back to the village? I'm not doing anything here. I'm leaving. You're going to stay here, though, the hobgoblin explained. What? I'm not staying out here with a bunch of goblins. I'm the leader so you don't have much of a choice. You can't just imprison me. Yes, I can. I'm the leader and you betrayed the tribe. If you try and run I'll hunt you down and skin you alive. Elias was overwhelmed by indignant horror. He could only gape as Gob arrived and Black Nail turned towards the other hobgoblin. Guard this human. Make sure he doesn't go anywhere and keep this gear safe. I don't want any goblins stealing anything, Black Nail told Gob as he shoved Elias his way. Nothing appeared about to explode or catch fire so Black Nail saw no reason to stick around. It was already late in the afternoon. He dropped all the stuff he had taken from the bandits he'd killed and got ready to leave. Yes, Chief, Gob replied as he nodded and grabbed Elias' shoulder. The smaller greyish hobgoblin was being his usual obedient self, but Elias still seemed to find him threatening. Hey, where are you going? Gods damn it all. You can't leave me here. What if they eat me? Elias wailed. Don't let anyone eat him, Black Nail yelled at Gob as he began to jog away. There was a wordless scream of frustration from behind him but he ignored it. The next stage of plan was to talk to Geralt again. Black Nail ran back over to the village. He was really doing this way too much lately. All the running back and forth was getting very tiresome. When the hobgoblin reached the clearing that contained the village, he pushed aside the bushes and saw something unexpected. There was a figure sitting on a chair over by the gate. After peering at the man for a few seconds Black Nail realized it was Geralt. He didn't appear to be injured or in distress, so why was he sitting there? What was going on? This wasn't something Black Nail had predicted would happen, and it certainly wasn't part of his plan. Black Nail had been planning to wait until dark and then sneak back in, but somehow a stupid human had already managed to mess things up. The hobgoblin stared at Geralt for a few seconds before shrugging, pulling up his hood, and stepping out of the forest. He didn't really have any other option but to go and talk to the man. Tentatively, Black Nail walked over the barren fields and into sight of the walls. Before he got halfway there was a sudden jerk of movement from Geralt as the man noticed Black Nail. He jumped to his feet and stared at the hooded hobgoblin. There you are. Thank the gods. I was afraid you had disappeared as well. I've been out here for hours. I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry I missed the meeting this morning, but some unfortunate events occurred, Geralt had exclaimed as Black Nail walked closer. Geralt had missed the meeting this morning as well? That was convenient. Black Nail had originally been planning on claiming he had been distracted by a crisis. He had spent a fair amount of time coming up with the best excuse possible, like getting into a fight with another hobgoblin, but apparently that had been a complete waste of time. You answer my questions first. What are you doing out here? The hobgoblin asked as he threw a suspicious glance towards the village walls. There was probably someone watching from there. I had to get your attention somehow. There are things you need to know and I didn't want you trying to sneak into the village. Black Nail stared at Geralt's face. The man didn't seem suspicious at all, and he actually even sounded apologetic. What's going on? The hobgoblin asked coyly. There was no point incriminating himself. 4 of our compatriots disappeared this morning. We think they stole some things and then ran off. As if that wasn't bad enough, the whole mess has made Tannen unduly suspicious of our group. He has the entire village on lockdown, which is why sneaking in would be a terrible idea. Black Nail tried to look surprised and outraged. They took stuff and headed off into the forest, by themselves? Who? Why? Rigalt, Helf, Elias, and Abjar are gone. The sons of whores must be headed back to civilization by themselves. I don't know what they could possibly be thinking, but they couldn't have gone anywhere else. Elias? That traitor. I thought he was loyal. I have been betrayed, Black Nail hissed dramatically. I thought they all were. Have you seen any sign of them? Geralt asked. No, but I can check for their trail. If they left towards Dagger Point there will be signs. Do you want me to hunt them down or will we all go after them together when we leave? Geralt grimaced before replying. We won't be leaving anytime soon. What? Black Nail asked with fake outrage. This actually sounded exactly like what he had been aiming for. On top of the stealing, the deserters also destroyed quite a few pairs of boots and other gear. Following after them would be very hard, if not impossible, Geralt had replied. Black Nail had to hide his smirk. He had enjoyed cutting that stuff up. How long of a wait? Black Nail asked as he pretended to glower angrily. Geralt grimaced and looked uncomfortable before replying. That's the thing, some of the men want to stay for a while now. The men who left were some of the most vocal advocates of leaving, and without any coin even if we get to a city we will basically be on the streets. Laying low here for a while sounds pretty tempting to some of the men and women, especially since Tannen has made it clear that we are welcome. So we aren't leaving. Probably not anytime soon, no. You don't get to decide that. I'm the leader, and I don't want to stay here, Black Nail hissed furiously, if ingenuously. I don't think we have much choice. I certainly don't enjoy the thought of dwelling out here in these boonies for a second longer than we have to. They don't even have an inn. It's nothing but a collection of shacks, but what's the other option? We have no money. The first solution that popped into Black Nail's head was that they could rob someone. That was an activity they had some experience with. However, bringing that up wouldn't serve Black Nail's purposes, so instead he took a step forward until his face was only a few inches from Geralt's and growled. Fine, but you all owe me. This is a debt that must be paid. Geralt flinched as the hobgoblin's hot breath hit his face. There was a hint of fear in his eyes as he responded. What do you want? Cheese, Black Nail whispered fervently as he stared into Geralt's eyes. The village has cheese and as long as we are here you and the others will bring it to me. Not a problem. I'm sure I can get that for you, Geralt replied nervously as he took a step back. A smile appeared on the hobgoblin's lips. His plan was coming along perfectly, and his cheese supply had been acquired. You'd better. Now explain why you met up with me inside of the village. That's not very sneaky. Like I said, Tannen is paranoid. I had to negotiate to leave the village at all. He thinks we might have allies hiding out in the forest and that we're planning to attack the village from within and without at the same time. I had to reassure him that there was only one person out in the forest and that I needed to talk to him. You told him about me? Black Nail asked. Geralt had been the one telling the hobgoblin to keep his presence a secret. I told him you're a ranger that hates being around people and didn't want to stay in the village. The story is that your face was mutilated by a run-in with a bear and that's why your voice is so unique. You can keep your hood up and wrap a scarf around your jaw when you meet him. Meet him? Why would I do that? Yes. I had to promise him a quick conversation with you, so that he would know I was telling the truth. It shouldn't be big deal. We'll just head to the gate and you can say a word or two. This wasn't part of Black Nail's plan. He didn't think it was going to be too big of a problem though. Fine, the hobgoblin agreed as he pulled on a pair of gloves. Geralt handed him a scarf which he then wrapped around his face. That done, the pair got up and headed over to the gate, which began to open as they approached. Someone had indeed been watching. When the gate swung open, Tannen stepped out. The bearded older man had a smoke pipe in his mouth, and there was a hard expressionless look on his face as he studied Black Nail's hooded form. See, there's no reason to be concerned. It's just as I explained. There is no one out here but our scout, and he is no threat to you or yours, Geralt had said with false cheer as they came to a stop in front of Tannen. That remains to be seen, the older man replied before turning back to Black Nail. So you're this mysterious scout of theirs. I thought I noticed one of you slipping away yesterday, and the young ones mentioned a creepy cloaked fellow. Yes, Black Nail replied in his best imitation of a human voice. Its high hiss-like tone still left something to be desired. You're not exactly talkative, are you? No. Tannen grunted in dissatisfaction. I hear you're a sodomite. Geralt let out a startled cough. Black Nail didn't react. He wasn't familiar with that word, but it sounded like an insult. Normally he would have responded violently to such a display of disrespect, but he was trying to lay low, and killing or injuring Tannen would probably ruin his plans. Cheese was worth a few unkind words. What? Preposterous. Why do you think that? Geralt asked with obvious surprise. The young lassie you kidnapped before, Joan, mentioned some of the things your bunch said around her. Like how this one here wasn't interested in women. That's a misunderstanding, and a large one. Like I said, Black Nail just isn't social at all. His injuries were rather extensive. Black Nail, that's an interesting name. I don't believe you've mentioned it before. Tannen said as a sly smile appeared on his lips. Yes, the hobgoblin responded deadpan. Tannen was clearly trying to annoy him so that he would talk, but that wasn't going to work because Black Nail was too smart. Also, he still had no idea what they were talking about. Every time Black Nail thought he had learned every human word, they came up with a new one. Black Nail is but a silly nickname. We all have them, Geralt had said as he shrugged. He had obviously intended for the gesture to look nonchalant, but he couldn't disguise his nervousness. Oh, it sounds like there is an interesting story there. Care to share it? I have a black toenail, Black Nail explained slowly. I see, Tannen responded cautiously as he puffed on his pipe. He seemed to be at a loss for words. There was a few seconds of silence as both Tannen and Black Nail stared at each other. Neither one of them spoke up and a hostile atmosphere began to build up. Their staring competition was interrupted by an unexpected yell from someone within the village. Black Nail, there you are! Kida shouted as she ran over. The young redhead was smiling joyfully. Black Nail felt a shiver of dread work its way up his spine, and Tannen frowned at the intrusion. He clearly didn't know how to handle the young woman. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me, Kida said as she came to stop in front of the hobgoblin. Black Nail's answering grimace was hidden by his scarf. He had been avoiding her. So you and this man are friendly, are you? Tannen asked with obvious interest. Of course, we go way back, Kida replied cheerfully. We've fought together a dozen times, and his master used to train me as well. No, Black Nail said. His master? Tannen inquired before blowing some smoke from his pipe. He looked thoughtful. She means Cedar, the ranger that trained him, Geralt had quickly interjected. Was this before or after he was maimed by the bear? Before, Geralt had responded just as Kida said, after. There was an awkward moment of silence and Tannen grinned smugly. He obviously wasn't convinced by Geralt's cover story. This is all beside the point. Kida shouldn't be here, Geralt had argued. She's half the reason I'm inclined to trust your group. If you truly meant me and mine harm, then I doubt she could keep it a secret from me, Tannen replied. Well, then you should extend that same trust to Black Nail. He really is just a ranger that likes to keep to himself. You've met him and had a nice little chat, so he probably wants to leave now, Geralt had argued. Yes, Black Nail agreed succinctly. Yay, let's go, Kida added. The hobgoblin asked as he experienced a growing sense of horror. He needed to get out of here. Well, I'm not staying here while you have adventures. That stupid kid Hashial keeps bugging me, and these dirty bumpkins want me to do chores. We are giving you a house. How do you expect to earn a living without working? Tannen pointed out in exasperation. It's not my fault this stupid mud heap isn't large enough to support a proper gang. Why would we want a street gang? Tannen replied as he glowered at Kida. It doesn't matter, because I'm joining Black Nail. I can be a forest ranger with him and scout out all the secret trails while we find hidden treasure. This idea didn't seem to impress any of the other people listening to her. The young redhead had managed to annoy and drive everyone else to exasperation in under a minute. There was no way Black Nail was going to let her accompany him. Hearts and home 6. Are we almost there yet? Kida asked Black Nail as she ducked under a low-hanging branch. Yes, I already told you that, the hobgoblin hissed in response. This was the third time he had answered her annoying question. Then how come we haven't gotten there yet? We should have if we were actually close. Because that's not how it works. Shut up and walk. It hadn't even been an hour yet and Black Nail already wanted to kill Kida. He really wished Geralt hadn't explained all the reason he couldn't. Tannen would be highly suspicious if she disappeared, and that would ruin all of Black Nail's plans. Why was he never allowed to kill Kida? It was if the world was trying to keep her alive just to annoy him. We're here, Black Nail hissed as he stepped out of the bushes at the edge of the forest. The rocky hills that made up the local goblin's lair lay in front of them. Kida took a moment to look around after pushing a bush aside. The young redhead was wearing tall slim boots that went up to her knees and a leather vest over her long green shirt. It was the same outfit she had worn during the trek north, but it had been washed and patched. This is a terrible secret base. It's just a bunch of rock piles, Kida replied as they began walking toward the hill. They had attracted the attention of quite a few goblins, but they all recognized Black Nail and kept their distance. None of them wanted to attract his attention. Kida also didn't seem too disturbed to see the goblins either. Black Nail had to speed up his pace in order to prevent her from walking ahead. I just conquered it. It will get better soon, Black Nail replied defensively. What did she expect? A fortress? They passed through a pair of hills and the center of the clearly came into sight. Gob was standing on a flat patch of rocky earth there. The hobgoblin was surrounded by a squad of goblins. Each of these goblins was holding a spear and standing straight. Gob noticed the newcomers, but after glancing at Black Nail to make sure he didn't need anything, he turned back to the goblins he was teaching and went back to work. Wow, you didn't waste any time before rounding up the local goblins. There sure are a lot of them, Kida remarked as she looked around. She didn't seem scared at all, even though she was among so many unfamiliar goblins. They started it. But you ended it, like the bloodthirsty boss you are, Kida laughed. So what are you scheming? I know you, Black Nail. There's no way you weren't involved in everything that's happened. You're up to something. It looks like you're building a goblin army here, and I don't think Geralt would approve. I'm not plotting anything. That's dumb. You're dumb. Shut up, Black Nail quickly replied as he tried to look innocent. I'm just hanging out in the forest and doing normal hobgoblin things like, sleeping. Ha, I don't believe that for a sharp sliver of a second. You're plotting something. You're like me. You're a scrapper and you can't stop until you're the king of the heap. Nope, I'm lazy and want to sleep all the time. It's all I do. Really? So you haven't lied to anyone and you aren't planning anything. I just told you so. I'm completely trustworthy. Then why is Elias right over there, when he's supposed to be with the deserters? Kida replied. Black Nail turned to look in the direction she was pointing. Elias was indeed right there. He was surrounded by another small squad of goblins with spears that appeared to be herding him towards Black Nail. Scamp was leading the group as they headed towards Black Nail. His chest was puffed up proudly as he swaggered forward, and it looked like he was in charge. Oh, it's you. Did you get yourself kidnapped as well? Elias called out when he noticed Kida. He sounded depressed but he looked fine. The goblins hadn't hurt him. No, I asked to come here. The village was boring and full of mud-brained bumpkins, Kida answered. Really? Then you're the dumbest person I've ever met. I knew you weren't the straightest of arrows, but that's just crazy. I'm not the one that's being pushed around by a bunch of naked goblins, she replied scornfully. Scamp smiled and waved at Kida and she returned the friendly gesture. The little goblin looked quite happy to see Kida. He ran over to her side and Kida gave him a pat on the head. Kida! Scamp exclaimed cheerfully as he hugged her leg. I missed you. I missed you too, the young redhead replied. I knew you would. Do you have any food? Scamp asked as he looked up at her with a sad begging expression on his face. Before anyone else could distract him, Black Nail spoke up in a commanding voice. I think Elias should be quiet. If he talks, those goblins will probably poke him painfully with their spears. Goblins do that. The hobgoblin emphasized certain words to get his meaning across. Hey! Elias said as a goblin suddenly poked him in the ribs. Ow, stop that. Ow. The stone-tipped spears didn't penetrate his shirt, but the goblins kept poking him every time he gasped in pain. It seemed like it was going to be an endless cycle. No, only if he talks, Black Nail hissed in frustration. He is saying ow, Scamp pointed out from where he was watching. That doesn't count. Scamp shrugged and then made several grunting noises. The other goblins lowered their weapons. Elias glared at them but kept his mouth shut. Take him away for now. I'll talk to him later, Black Nail told the goblins. Right now there are more important things I have to do. Sure thing, boss, Scamp replied. He then walked over and gave the nearest goblin a forceful push before leading the other goblins away. He seemed very proud and happy to have assumed a leadership position within the tribe, even if he was only really a translator. Let's get back to what we were talking about before. You were explaining your plan, Kida said when Elias' group had disappeared behind one of the nearby hills. No, I wasn't, Black Nail replied. He wasn't going to fall for that. He was too smart. So you admit to having won? No, I don't. I have never admitted anything. You have the wrong person. Kida rolled her eyes. She didn't seem convinced. She was obviously too stupid to understand him properly. You're right. You're not sharp enough to come up with a good plan. I bet your plan is really stupid. That's not true. My plan is the best ever. Oh, what is it? I'm going to. Wait, this is another trick, Black Nail replied uncertainly. You may as well tell me. I already know about Elias and you just confessed to having a scheme in motion. Elias proves nothing. He got separated from the others and lost in the woods when they left. Some goblins found him and brought him here. I'm hiding him because the others are angry and I'm such a great loving leader, Black Nail growled in explanation. He had known the two humans would probably meet if Kida followed him, so he had come up with an excuse earlier. I don't believe that for a moment. You'd bleed him dry if he betrayed you. There isn't a shred of mercy in your body, Black Nail. You may have the others fooled but not me. She had a point about his lack of mercy. It was also clear that Kida was not going to believe his lies, no matter how convincing and well thought out they were. That was all right, though. He had a backup plan for dealing with her and it was more fun anyway. Black Nail took a sudden step towards Kida. The unexpected movement caught her off guard and she flinched. The hobgoblin grabbed the front of Kida's vest and pulled her forward. His strong grip kept her off balance as he glared at her. Their faces were only a few inches apart. What? She exclaimed. She sounded mad but also nervous. Black Nail didn't reply right away. Instead, he growled for several long seconds. His lips rose to reveal his long jagged teeth. Fear shone in Kida's eyes but instead of trying to pull away she went perfectly still. Her reaction satisfied Black Nail. It was time to scare this girl into line. He was the great Black Nail and she would do as she was told. Listen, little human. I am the leader here, the chieftain, Black Nail hissed as he stared into her eyes. His face was twisted up into the most menacing visage he could muster. If you tell anyone anything about my plans I will hunt you down. I will pry your eyes from your skull and slurp them down while I cut off your delicate fingers and chubby little toes. Obey me or suffer. Kida didn't move. Her face was so pale it seemed almost frozen, but as Black Nail watched it came back to life. The fear faded and Kida smiled excitedly. This wasn't the reaction he had been hoping for. Anything you want, Black Nail. You can trust me. It'll be just like before the battle, except now you're the big boss. The urge to groan and throw his hands up in frustration welled up in Black Nail, but he resisted it. He just gripped Kida's shirt tighter and shook her a bit. No, I'm not trusting you with anything. I'm just scaring you into silence. Be scared. Matt, it's all the same. You're just like my brother. All his yelling and threats were just to toughen me up so I would get stronger. That's how I knew he cared. Her response flabbergasted the hobgoblin so much he wanted to claw at his own eyes. Black Nail was beginning to suspect Kida's relationship with her brother had been more than a little abnormal. The hobgoblin tried to think up some way he could get his point across without leaving any incriminating marks on her, but nothing occurred to him. He let out a frustrated hiss as he let Kida go. The young redhead caught herself and then casually brushed the front of her shirt off. So, are you going to tell me your plan now? I want to help. Fine, as long as it will shut you up, Black Nail hissed in reply. He had given up. There was no way he was going to tell the redhead all the details of his scheme, but she could probably be trusted with some of it. Her particular type of crazy stupid meant she was unlikely to betray him. You're building a goblin army, aren't you? You're going to unleash a horde of green killers and conquer the north. What? No, that's stupid. Goblins make terrible fighters. They're too small and cowardly. Gob is training a bunch of goblins to fight right over there. I can see them. Black Nail snorted and waved dismissively. That's just discipline training so they will work harder and smarter. Then what is your plan? Kida asked. She sounded disappointed that there would be no screaming goblin horde invading the north. I will kill Warwick. Herat and him fought over territory. My mistress lost, but I will fulfill her wish and take everything from Warwick. Black Nail explained proudly. Although he hid it, the hobgoblin felt a twinge of embarrassment saying all that aloud. Ha, I knew it. There was no way you were going to run away from the wolf. You're not a spineless wimp like the others. So what's the plan if you aren't using goblins? I do want a few goblins and hobgoblins, but not an army. I want a group that can move faster and sneakier than humans. Then I will strike at Warwick from the shadows and prey upon his minions, Black Nail answered as he grinned savagely. He was really looking forward to it. You won't beat him that way. He can afford to lose a lot of men. He's the top dog around these parts, so all the weaklings flock to his side. I'm not stupid, I know. That's just the first part of the plan. Once I'm famous I will use other humans against him. How will you do that? I will tell you later if you behave, Black Nail replied. Hopefully, that would motivate her to keep her mouth shut. Fine, then at least tell me what you're doing here in this camp right now so that I can help out. Oh, I should get a tour. Black Nail shrugged in response. That actually didn't seem like a terrible idea. He might even be able to find some make work for her to do that would keep her out of trouble while he told Elias what he was allowed to say. He didn't want Kida learning everything. Black Nail led the way and they walked around the camp. He showed her the highlights and most important parts. And this is another cave. It's not the biggest one, but it's very dry. Is there anything here but rocks and caves? Goblins, lots of goblins, Black Nail answered. Kida groaned. Well, I've seen enough damned caves. What is Gob up to? I have him training goblins how to hunt using traps. Then why are most the goblins he is talking with holding spears? Those are to use against other goblins. The stupid runts need to keep the stupider runts in line or they will steal from the traps. Dealing with goblins was as frustrating as dealing with humans, but in a completely different way. As they walked over to Gob, Black Nail explained that he was building a corps of loyal goblins that would keep the others in line. That was almost as important as training trappers, since goblins weren't very diligent workers unless they were being threatened with physical punishment, or they were the ones that got to deal out the physical punishment. He also told Kida about the foragers he had sent out to gather materials. Gob was planning on building a longhouse like the one he had built at his old lair. Poles made from young trees would be tied together using rope. Thankfully, several of the goblins that had come with Gob knew how to make rope from plant fibers and they were teaching others. The ropes were also an important part of making traps and tools. The pair stopped a few feet away from the circle of goblins around Gob. They watched the goblins working at their tasks. None of them seemed to be doing exactly the same thing. Some were clearing, making tools of various kinds, while others were simply watching as Gob hissed at their companions. Black Nail let out a nostalgic sigh as he watched. He himself was a master of rope making. He had spent a long time learning such skills under Cedar, and he was planning on putting that knowledge to good use now. Everything he had been taught would help him get his vengeance. What are those goblins over there doing? Kida asked as she pointed to Black Nail's left. The hobgoblin turned to see what she was talking about. Someone had built a fire pit at the base of one of the nearby hills. Two goblins sat next to a ring of stones that contained a small fire. A large flat-sided rock jutted out of the hill behind them. It formed a small cliff-like wall, and there was a pile of branches piled next to it. Black Nail instantly recognized one of the goblins. It was Imp. What are you doing? Black Nail asked as he walked over. Imp looked up and gave Black Nail a blank look before answering. I'm helping burn things. This piece of information didn't clarify anything. Imp had always made Black Nail uncomfortable. He was a weird little goblin and Black Nail really didn't understand what went through his head. He was always watching silently from somewhere or doing inexplicable things. Why are you burning things? Black Nail asked. Practice, the other goblin beside him replied as he turned to smile at Black Nail. This new goblin's eyes glowed with feverish excitement as they reflected light from the fire. He was an average-sized goblin that Black Nail had never seen before. His body was slightly on the skinny side and his skin had a pale grey cast to it. He had messy reddish-brown hair that covered the top of his head and orange irises. If anything, this new goblin looked even weirder than Imp. Black Nail hoped he wasn't a mage. That wouldn't likely end well. I like your hair. It's a great color, Kida remarked cheerfully as she studied the goblin. She then reached down to pat him on the head and mess up his hair. The goblin didn't appear to know how to react to this. He flinched and threw Imp and Black Nail confused looks. Black Nail just shrugged in response. He didn't know how to deal with Kida either. I bet he doesn't have a name. Can I name him? Kida asked Black Nail. She didn't wait for an answer. I think it should be Fairer. Black Nail opened his mouth and started to ask her why she had chosen that name, but he stopped when he realized he didn't really care. Kida answered anyway. It means fire or something in Old Imperial, so it matches the color of your hair. Why are you two really making fire? Black Nail asked the goblins. He still found them suspicious even though Kida had distracted him. They are probably cooking or something, Kida said. It's not time to eat yet. We will need it later. Fire is important. Imp answered matter-of-factly. Black Nail didn't disagree, but he wasn't sure they were thinking of the same things. An idea suddenly popped into Black Nail's head. While it wasn't time to eat quite yet, it would be soon. A large part of his plan was to feed the goblins a lot so that they would stick around even when he made them work, but he didn't have a pot to make stew. Sending Kida to get one would get her out of the way for a while so he could talk to Elias and get some work done. I need you to go get a big pot from the village so I can cook. Geralt owes me, and I will send some goblins to help you, Black Nail told her. Fine, this tour has been boring anyway, but I want to take Fairer with me, Kida replied. Black Nail turned to look at the goblin in question. He was poking the fire with a stick and giggling as sparks shot up into the air. In his other hand he was holding a steel fire striker that Imp had probably given him. All right, but don't burn the village down, Black Nail replied warily. I need those humans. Hearts and Home 7. The village of Shelter didn't end up burning down, although Black Nail had been expecting it to. Kida and the goblins returned with a large iron pot and without causing a commotion. The goblins kept to the woods and never went near the settlement, or anything flammable. I just walked up to the gate and asked for it, Kida told Black Nail. Geralt found one for me as soon as I told him that you sent me. He also gave me this. The young red-headed woman passed Black Nail a small wrapped-up parcel, which he quickly unwrapped. There was a small wheel of yellow cheese inside. It had been far too long, almost a week. Black Nail felt his eyes began to water as joy overwhelmed him, although it might have been caused by the poignant smell wafting off the cheese. It was a very strong blend. It looks like you are trying to inhale that, Kida remarked as she took a step back and pinched her nose. Black Nail's nose was pressed against the wedge of cheese. He took a deep breath and just enjoyed the blissful aroma for a second. Even several of the nearby goblins gave him strange looks but he didn't care. After licking his prize a few times the hobgoblin wrapped it back up and shoved it into his coat for later. You brought the pot so now I'm going to cook up some stew. Black Nail told Kida. It's an important part of my plan. Oh, well, I need to borrow a bowl or something because I didn't bring any, Kida replied. Black Nail stared at her for an awkward few seconds. Bowls, right, he mused to himself as he scratched the side of his nose. He had completely forgotten about those. He had one for himself but that was it. In order to eat stew his goblin minions were going to need bowls as well. You couldn't eat soup or stew without something to put it in. This was a pain because Black Nail was fairly certain none of them had any. How could his minions forget something as simple as bowls? It was annoying how dumb they all were. Do you think anyone would get suspicious if we asked the village for 100 bowls? Black Nail asked Kida. Yay, I think that would get some of them thinking. Can you make your own? How? People usually make them out of wood or clay. You could try that. You mean I could get goblins to make them out of wood or clay, Black Nail clarified. He wasn't going to be making bowls for stupid little goblins. If goblins couldn't be forced to do physical labor then what was the point of them? None of the goblins here use clay or whittle. Kida asked. Nope, Black Nail answered after a second or two of thought. He hadn't seen any evidence of that. The hobgoblin knew what clay was. Cedar had once pointed it out to him at the bank of a stream. The grey material had definitely been one of the better tasting types of dirt, but that wasn't saying much. Black Nail vaguely knew that humans made stuff out of clay but he had no idea how. Kida didn't know much about it either and it sounded too complicated to figure out quickly. He also had no clay to work with. It's too late to work. I'm going to eat, Black Nail announced as he headed over to the fire pit Imp and Fairer had made. Both goblins were once again sitting and watching the fire. Black Nail couldn't cook any stew but that wasn't the only thing he knew how to make, it was simply the best. The goblins Gob had been stockpiling food. There was a rack covered in rabbits and squirrels from the traps that had been skinned and drained of blood, and there was a pile of edible roots and leaves. Black Nail looked over the ingredients for a while before deciding on a recipe. I need wakef leaves, Black Nail mused to himself. The plants had large fan-shaped leaves. They themselves weren't edible, but you could cook things in them for flavor. The short stubby plants were also very common and grew on the ground. Black Nail rounded up several goblins and sent them out to harvest the leaves. He also sent a goblin to bring over Scamp and Elias. You two can help me cook, the hobgoblin told Farrer and Imp. He didn't plan on doing all the cooking himself, and the sooner he taught others how to do, the sooner he could make them do it for him. As disturbing as these two goblins were, they also were among the smartest of his minions. Yes, Chief, Imp replied as he stood up and walked over to Black Nail's side. Farrer continued to stare at the fire for a few more seconds before smiling at Black Nail and getting up. Scamp and Elias then appeared. Watch and copy what I do, if you can, Black Nail told everyone there. Yeah, grunt work. At least it beats sitting around or following Scamp, Elias huffed indignantly. As his minions watched, Black Nail began cutting up the meat and the veggies on a nearby flat rock. He didn't plan on putting too much effort into this, so large chunks were good enough. He chose a pale round root and some small spicy leaves to add to the mix, and left the other veggies for another time. When the goblins started dropping off the leaves, he mixed the ingredients together and wrapped them in the leaves to make small packages. After he was finished with the first serving, all the others began chopping and sorting. They quickly got quite a few wraps down, so Black Nail hung them above the fire using a rack made of sticks and twine. That smells pretty damn good, Kida remarked. Of course, I'm amazing at everything, Black Nail replied confidently as he took a seat on a nearby rock and relaxed. Now get back to work. Soon, the rest of the goblin tribe began to gather as the smell of the food drew them in. By the time the first bit of food was done cooking, there were dozens of them. Black Nail handed out cooked parcels to all of Gob's overseers and everyone who had helped cook. Yummy! Scamp declared as he started eating. The goblin only stopped eating in order to smugly look down on the goblins that hadn't gotten food yet. Why are you putting so much effort into cooking for these goblins? Elias asked. He sounded like he had accepted his situation for now. It's motivation so they learn and stay loyal. Now they know why they are hunting, Black Nail explained as he chewed. A small riot broke out behind him. A mob of goblins that hadn't gotten food yet banded together to raid a smaller group that had. Screeching goblins wrestled and bit each other as they fought for the food. Black Nail didn't interfere. He just smiled contentedly and nodded proudly to himself. It seemed like the goblins enjoyed his cooking. As the humans got clear, Gob intervened with a squad of overseers. They started indiscriminately beating all the fighters with the butts of their spears. No fighting here. The great chief has blessed you with yummies. Rejoice! Gob yelled as he kicked a goblin out of sight. The fighting soon stopped and order was restored. Night began to fall and the rocky clearing grew dark as everyone finished eating. The fire was still burning brightly in the middle of the goblin mob, but no one was still cooking. Black Nail decided that there was little point in staying up, so he decided to go to sleep for the night. He had a cozy new cave to try out. Where am I supposed to sleep? Kida asked when Black Nail got up and started to walk away. Elias and Scamp had already claimed another small cave as their own earlier. I don't care, Black Nail replied before yawning. He was definitely starting to feel tired. Don't be like that. There's plenty of room here in this cave, Kida remarked as they arrived at the entrance to the cavern. Black Nail briefly considered chasing the annoying redhead away, but he didn't feel like going through the effort. His cave was also more than big enough for the two of them. Fine, but you're sleeping over there, Black Nail replied as he pointed to the other side of the cave. Kida yawned and nodded in agreement. They both unrolled the blankets from their pack and went to bed. Early the next morning, Black Nail got Kida up and went back to work. There was a lot of things that needed done in order to fix up this camp. Kida had been right when she had called it just a pile of rocks. Herat and Cedar had built their old base camp from nothing into a small village, and Black Nail planned to do the same. He had sort of been paying attention to most the things they had done. What are we doing now? Kida asked after she had gotten dressed and they had both eaten. We still need bowls. Let's try making wood ones. Maybe it will be easy. Black Nail announced as he went to find a suitable piece of wood. It wasn't easy. It only took a few minutes to find a large enough branch and to cut it down, but trying to whittle it into shape proved very frustrating. Black Nail used the axe he had taken from the slain hobgoblin and his own knives. As he had been taught, the hobgoblin had cleaned and sharpened the axe as soon as he claimed it. It had known it would be useful later. This is stupid, Black Nail huffed as he tossed the piece of wood he had been working on away. It was shaped nothing like a bowl and still had some bark attached to it. There was no way goblins were going to be able to make bowls using stone tools anytime soon, and Black Nail wasn't going to waste any of his knives by giving them away. There must be another way, he growled as he turned to stare at Kida. Humans made civilization seem so easy. Black Nail refused to fail at bowl making. He was pretty sure that was one of the simpler things humans made, but he had never been taught how. All the humans he knew had just carried the things around with them, or they had killed another human and taken them. I've heard some people in the West drink from skulls, Kida suggested hesitantly. That was an idea. Black Nail liked it. The top of people's heads were just the right shape to hold liquids. Why hadn't this idea occurred to him right away? It was so obvious. Great, but where can I get so many large skulls? Black Nail mused. There were a few lying around, but not nearly enough. The only creatures around in sufficient numbers and with big enough heads were goblins. Killing a few dozen of them to make dishes seemed wasteful though, and might cause problems with recruitment later. Maybe he could find another tribe and start a war? Still, cleaning those skulls seemed like a lot of messy work. We will collect skulls but they won't be enough, Black Nail admitted in defeat. Since he hadn't come up with a solution to his dishware problem, the hobgoblin decided to focus on making food that could be eaten by hand for now. Preserving meat was first on that list. While Gob continued to train the goblins how to hunt and make rope, Black Nail picked out a few of the smarter looking ones and began to teach them how to smoke meat. It wasn't all that hard, so even goblins could do it. The first step was to dig a hole a few feet deep. Firewood was placed at the bottom and then sticks were inserted into the sides of the hole up above that to make a grill for the meat. Green branches from pine trees were placed over the top to keep most the smoke in. The important part was having an overseer around to poke goblins that tried to eat the meat, and making sure the overseers themselves weren't hungry. 2 goblins actually volunteered to help with the smoking, Farrer and Imp. Both of them walked over and began to copy the goblins Black Nail was instructing. At first the hobgoblin was tempted to chase them away since they were so creepy, but they both quickly mastered the skills. They were too useful to chase away, even if they were super suspicious. Farrer probably just wanted to play with fire, but Black Nail had no idea why Imp ever did anything. Soon, the pair of goblins began teaching the others and Black Nail took the opportunity to step away. He was a leader now, so he never worked at anything unless he couldn't find someone else to do it, besides there were other important things he needed to do. Black Nail looked around the goblin lair. The center of the rocky hills he had conquered through strength had already changed a fair bit. It had been completely bare before, but now there was a large fire pit and several racks where meat was hanging. Signs of habitation were everywhere. Another thing that Black Nail noticed was that a lot of the food left over from last night had disappeared. Even some of the uncooked roots were gone. That was annoying but hardly surprising. They had been left unattended in the middle of a goblin settlement after all. Black Nail decided to do something about it. He found the coldest cave and kicked all the goblins out of it, although there were only a few there since it was so cold. Next, he had all the food that wasn't being used moved into the cave, and then told Gob to post a guard at the cave and another at the drying racks at all times. Exercising his amazing leadership skills left Black Nail feeling very proud of himself. I'm bored. Let's do something interesting now. I followed you out here because I wanted excitement. Kida told Black Nail as she walked over to him. She had wandered off somewhere earlier. Alright, I feel like hunting. You can come. Just be quiet and try to learn, Black Nail told her. Great. Let's go. I hope we run into something dangerous, like an ogre. That was the exact opposite of what Black Nail wanted and he said so. I hope we run into something useful, like a poor lost cheese merchant. After walking back over to his cave, Black Nail grabbed his gear. He took a water flask, some jerky for a snack, and his bow. The sky overhead contained a scattering of white puffy clouds, but there was still a lot of blue to see, and there was next to no wind. I need a bow. I lost mine way back, Kida observed. Then you need to find or make a new one later, Black Nail hissed dismissively. She didn't really need one anyway since she was mostly there to carry stuff for him. Kida tried to argue but Black Nail shushed her. No talking in the forest. You have to be quiet while hunting, he told her. It was even sort of true. There was a small stream that ran along the western edge of the clearing. The hobgoblin decided to follow it north, away from the human village. He hadn't actually been out that way yet. This part of the forest was completely unknown to him, so he wanted to explore it. There might be interesting or useful things there. Like on the other side of the camp, the terrain was rough. The same tall tree-studded hills rose off in the distance and hid the horizon. The morning chatter of birds echoed through the forest as Black Nail and Kida walked along the edge of the stream. The trees here weren't very tall, and they only formed a patchy canopy overhead that let a lot of light through. Most of them were evergreens with brown trunks. They didn't have much in the way of branches near the ground to block Black Nail's sight, so he could see clearly in most directions. The stream cut its way through the earth as it rushed down a series of hills. Its winding banks had long ago exposed the occasional large grey rock, but the water was surrounded mostly by hard-packed dirt and the roots of trees. After a few minutes of hiking, a flash of movement up ahead caught Black Nail's attention. He raised a hand to signal for Kida to stop, and began to creep silently forward. Black Nail climbed up the steep bank of the creek and up to the trees. He hid behind the closest tree trunk and then peered out from behind it. Up ahead and around the bend, there was a deer drinking from the stream. The beast looked like a fully grown doe with brown fur and white spots on its flanks. Black Nail grinned as he drew an arrow and readied his bow. He had found some worthy prey. Without wasting another second, the hobgoblin stepped out from his hiding spot and lined up his shot. He let the string go and his arrow zoomed straight towards his target. It slammed into the deer's neck. The beast screeched and took off like a shot. It scrambled down the slippery bank of the creek and out of sight. It was wounded but far from dead yet. Did you get it? Kida asked breathlessly as she ran up beside Black Nail. Yes, let's go, he replied. Black Nail jumped down to the creek and ran over to where the deer had been standing. He scanned the muddy soil there and then sniffed it. There were clear hoof prints visible and drops of blood were scattered around. He had the creature's scent and he knew it was bleeding. The wound he had given the deer was fatal. It wouldn't get far before it lost strength and faltered. What now? Kida asked. Now you be quiet again and follow me, Black Nail hissed as he began to jog after the deer. He had no doubt in his ability to track down his wounded quarry. Even without his amazing sense of smell he could clearly see the trail of broken branches and hoof prints it had left. The only question was whether something unexpected would happen. Another predator might appear or they could stumble into something else deadly. The forest was a dangerous place, and the hunter could quickly become the hunted if they weren't wary. Hearts and homes ate. The sound of rushing water grew louder, as Black Nail tracked the deer he had shot through the vibrant green forest. Kida was right behind him as he ran along the edge of the stream. Black Nail knew he was going the right way. The beast's muddy hoof prints were plain to see, and the scent of its blood was thick in the air. The smell excited Black Nail. Hunting down wounded prey was always a red-hot rush. He wanted to drop down to all fours so he could sniff the earth as he moved. He suppressed that urge but he couldn't stop himself from salivating in anticipation of running down his bleeding prey. There was no escape from him now. Soon, the deer's sweet flesh would be his to feast upon. The creek he was following lay at the bottom of a shallow gully, and it continued to wind its way past rows of short evergreen trees until it suddenly ended up ahead. Black Nail approached the spot where the water disappeared into thin air and looked down. There was a cliff below him and the stream at his feet rushed over its edge and became a roaring waterfall. The white water fell for 30 feet or so before slamming into a wide pool below. Mist spread out from the base of the waterfall and washed over the pool's rocky shores. The air here was cool, humid, and full of energy. Kida walked over to Black Nail's side and started to say something, but the hobgoblin elbowed her in the stomach and she shut up. He was scanning the scene below carefully and he didn't have time for the redhead's stupidity. A moment later, he looked away from the pool and to each side. The forest continued on his left but he saw no sign the deer had gone that way. To his right, the ground sloped downwards and there was a path down towards the bottom of the cliff. Almost immediately, he spotted a splatter of dark red blood on a rock there. This way, he hissed quietly to Kida as he headed after the deer. The roaring of the waterfall drowned out almost all the other noises. Even Black Nail's long sensitive ears were a little deafened, so the hobgoblin was wary. He carefully observed his surroundings for movement as he stalked forward into the rocks. It wasn't until he reached the bottom of the incline that he spotted something. Something brown was poking out from behind a large triangular rock. Black Nail crept silently over to get a better look and got ready to draw his sword, just in case. However, the identity of the object soon became obvious. It was the deer. It had collapsed at the base of the rock, and its still chest indicated that it was no longer breathing. Black Nail's arrow was still sticking out of its now blood-stained neck. "We got it!" Kida exclaimed happily when she walked up behind Black Nail. "We," the hobgoblin grunted in reply. It seemed like the hunt was over. He was almost disappointed that it hadn't been more exciting. Some real struggle from the prey would have been nice. "Let's get out of here before something comes to try and steal our prey," Black Nail told Kida as he scanned the nearby trees suspiciously. The deer was his prize now, and he didn't want some big fat lazy beast stealing it. It took a fair bit of time and effort to get the deer carcass back to camp, but most the effort was Kida's, so Black Nail didn't care. This was the reason he had allowed her to come, to carry things. On the way, the pair spotted a few deposits of grey clay along the stream bank. It seemed like procuring clay wouldn't be hard. Now they just needed to figure out what to do with it. That wasn't Black Nail's first concern, though. The priority was skinning and butchering the deer he had just brought down before it went bad. He also wanted to use this opportunity to teach his minions, so he rounded up his larger followers. Kida was already with him so he went and found Gob and Elias. They watched as Black Nail dragged the carcass over to an empty spot near the drying rack and got to work. First, he slit the dead animal's throat and hung it up so that the blood would drain out. Blood went bad quickly and would taint the meat. Next, he took out a knife and began to cut the skin away from the flesh. He had plans for the pelt so he tried to keep most of it in one piece. The bloody work quickly drew a small crowd of curious goblins. Black Nail ignored them, and when the hide came free he put it aside and started to butcher the animal. His knife split open the animal's guts and he reached in to pull out all the organs. Gob diligently watched everything Black Nail did. Goblins usually just ripped their prey apart and nibbled them down to the bone so this was all new to him. Kida had done similar things a few times before when she had been learning from Cedar but Elias was a city boy. He scowled in disgust as Black Nail worked, especially when the intestines were pulled out and dumped into a steaming pile on the ground. The final step of the butchering was to cut the carcass up into smaller pieces. Black Nail used his long knife to cut off the deer's hunches and strip the flesh from the bone. When he was done there wasn't much left of the deer but its detached head, squishy organs, and bloody bones. "See, even idiots like you can do it," Black Nail told his minions as he plucked the eyes from the animal's skull and slurped them down. They were the nice and chewy reward for his hard work. "I will remember everything you have done, great chief. 100 deer will be laid at your feet," Gob replied as Black Nail nodded happily. That was the kind of enthusiasm and drive he liked in his minions. "Ha, Black Nail's right, you two are dumb as bricks," Kida laughed. For some reason she thought she had been excluded from his comment. "I hate you all," Elias cursed. However, Black Nail had already turned away and was busy planning his next job. Having all this fresh meat in front of him just reminded him that he still needed to figure out how to make bowls. The deer's bones would have added flavor to a stew. "Do any of you know how to use clay?" he asked the others. "You mean baking it to make pottery?" Elias replied uncertainly. The young man didn't much know more than Kida, and Gob just stared uncomprehendingly at Black Nail and shrugged. Black Nail groaned. Of course, none of them were useful. As usual, he was going to have to do everything himself. "You need to go back to the humans and find one that can make bowls from clay," the hobgoblin told Kida. "And what do I do when I find such a person?" Kida asked. "Learn from them, or if it's too hard bring someone who knows back with you. I can meet them." "What if they don't want to come?" Black Nail frowned thoughtfully before replying. "I can talk to them at the village. but if they try to keep clay making secret from me then I will sneak in and grab them when it gets dark. They will talk. Sounds like a plan, Kida answered as she smiled and rubbed her hands together gleefully. Why does that excite you, and whose side are you on? Elias asked in disbelief. My own. I don't owe anyone anything, Kida snorted. This caused Black Nail to glance her way. Except maybe Black Nail. We've saved each other's lives more time than I can count, she quickly corrected herself. Black Nail was sure she couldn't count very high, but he let the comment go. The young redhead didn't waste any time in heading back to shelter. Black Nail sent Scamp and a couple goblins with her to keep her out of trouble and so that she could send him a message if they needed to meet up later. When she was gone, Black Nail let Gob get back to his own projects and started tanning the hide of the deer he had caught. With Eli's help Black Nail scraped the remaining flesh from the underside of the hide. When all the flesh and fat had been removed they took it to the creek and washed it thoroughly. The hide was then stretched out the drying rack and tied in place so that it wouldn't shrink. That was all they could do for now since it would take a few days to dry. Since Kida wasn't back yet, Black Nail decided to wander around and see if there was anyone that needed bossing around. After yelling at a few goblins that were lazing around he stumbled over to where Gob was working. The other hobgoblin had finished training the overseers and teaching goblins basic skills, so now he was building a structure of some sort. Gob had been sending out goblins to collect materials for a while now. He had built up a stockpile of twine, bark, and poles made from slender trees, and now he was using them to create a longhouse. Black Nail had seen the small one Gob had created at his old tribe's lair, and this new one looked like it was going to be a fair bit bigger. He already had the frame of the building up. Poles had been stuck into the ground, bent to form an arch for the roof, and tied into place. They weren't all up yet, but when they were the large strips of bark would be tied to them to form walls. The finished building would be a comfier place to sleep than in a cave. While Gob was working Black Nail decided to procure some of his materials in order to build himself a bed. A few pieces of lumber would make the frame and he could pile some dry plants on top to soften the surface. Gob looked up but didn't say anything as Black Nail began to drag several poles away. He put them down near the entrance to his cave and then used the axe to cut them up. He had just about finished when Scamp ran over. Could have found some people who know the thing you want to know, the little goblin exclaimed excitedly as he ran in a circle around Black Nail. They want to meet at the village. Scamp's blabbering wasn't very clear but he probably meant that Kida's mission had been successful. It was good that they apparently didn't need to kidnap anyone, but Black Nail still had some concerns. How many people? Black Nail asked. She didn't say, Scamp replied as he stopped running in circles. The hobgoblin nodded and went into his cave to grab his backpack. He opened it, put on gloves, wrapped a red scarf around his face, and pulled his hood up. If he was going back to the village then he needed to disguise himself. When he had finished dressing, Black Nail hid a few extra daggers around his person. He didn't trust the humans of the village and wanted to be ready to fight his way out. With that done, Black Nail headed out into the forest. He jogged through the trees at a steady pace until he spotted something out of place. Several sets of paw prints crossed the trail he was running along. Black Nail took a second to crouch down and study the tracks. They definitely belonged to a pack of wolves. Normally that wouldn't have bothered Black Nail too much, but one set of prints was much larger than any he had seen before. Black Nail looked up and scanned the forest around himself nervously. Only when he was sure there was nothing nearby did he lean over and sniff the ground. There was something off about the smell of the prints as well. An out-of-place mineral scent similar to that of Mahedium's workshop lingered where the animal had been. Disturbed, Black Nail got up and studied his surroundings again. He didn't like this development, but the forest seemed normal, so he got up and began running again. Just to be safe, it would be a good idea to start sending his minions out in groups now, especially Kida, at least until he wouldn't be blamed for her death. The rest of the trip to the village was uneventful. Black Nail reached the area of clear ground that surrounded the village. He eyed the front gate suspiciously for a few moments before sauntering out of the woods and crossing the fields. There was no point in being sneaky. Open up, Black Nail shouted as he pounded on the door. Gods above, man. You don't need to raise such a ruckus, the guard replied as the entrance swung open. I'm here to meet some people, and not to do anything unfriendly or suspicious, Black Nail said as he stepped inside. He was out of practice when it came to talking to humans. So I've been told, the man replied as he gestured for the hobgoblin to go on. Black Nail didn't need any further invitation. He quickly walked past the man and into the village. There were a bunch of small houses lining the main street and an older woman bustled by, but he didn't see Kida anywhere. The young redhead was supposed to be waiting for him. Where was she? Feeling very annoyed, Black Nail concentrated on listening for her voice. At first he didn't hear anything, but then he heard a laugh that sounded like it had come from Kida off in the distance. The hobgoblin scowled and stalked towards the source of the noise. He slipped into an alley between two homes so that he could stay out of sight. Another closer burst of laughter allowed Black Nail to pinpoint Kida's location, so he lengthened his stride. A few seconds later, he turned a corner and saw her standing in front of a shed that lay behind a house, and she wasn't alone. Black Nail recognized the faces of the three young humans the bandits had used as hostages when they had first arrived at the village. Yay, I've been in around a dozen battles and killed at least 20 men, Kida bragged. She was facing the three smaller humans and there was a proud look on her face. Really, that sounds so terrible, the blonde girl gasped in surprise. Nah, I'm not afraid of anything, Kida replied dismissively. It was all the other bandits that were terrified of me and my sword skills. Black Nail remembered Kida's sword skills quite clearly. He had trained alongside Kida under Vorsha, so he knew that when she had a sword in hand Kida was most dangerous to herself. Did you ever see any real magic? The taller blonde boy asked. He sounded excited and curious, but he was looking to the side as if trying to prove that he didn't care all that much. Sure, I saw tons of magic. Kida answered. Our band had a mage and a few vessels. The mage was always throwing flaming balls of fire around. Vessels are real? I thought they were just exaggerated stories, the younger lad with short brown hair remarked. Of course they are real. You've even met one, Kida replied as she rolled her eyes. With sudden haste, Black Nail's hooded form stepped out of the shadows and headed for Kida. She had said more than enough already, and it was time to shut her up before she revealed something important. He was almost directly behind her so she didn't see him coming, but her companions did and they froze in surprise. Eep, Kida squealed as Black Nail placed a hand on her shoulder. She spun around to see who it was and only relaxed when she recognized Black Nail's distinctive clothes. An awkward smile forced its way onto her face. So you're not afraid of anything? Black Nail chuckled as he stepped up beside her. I wasn't afraid, I was just on guard, Kida countered. Black Nail's the only person who can sneak up on me like that. We both trained under the same Master Ranger, she quickly explained to the others. Greetings, Mr. Black Nail. Kida has told us a bit about you. You probably remember me. I'm Joan, the blonde hesitantly interjected in order to introduce herself. She gave him a friendly nod. She's been more than a little vague about you, though. Why do you hide your face all the time? It's bloody suspicious, the older male asked as he glared at Black Nail. Don't be rude, Hashial, Joan told the blonde male. Why shouldn't I be rude? It's weird how welcoming everyone is being to these newcomers. Some of them seem dangerous to me. I mean look at him, he replied. You're one to talk. You've been trailing after Kida like a hound, the younger lad countered. Black Nail remembered that his name was Avis. I have not. Anyway, Kida isn't the problem here, Hashial protested. The youth's bickering didn't seem like it was going to end any time soon, and Black Nail didn't have all day. If they had been goblins he would have just smacked them around a bit, but they weren't, so he delegated. I came here for a reason. Shut these younglings up and take me to the person who knows how to shape clay, he hissed quietly at Kida. Ah, that's Joan. Don't worry, I have these young fools eating out of my hand. I'll shut them up and get her to show you the trick, she replied. To Black Nail, Kida didn't seem all that different from them. Hashial was the same height as her and probably weighed more. Black Nail held his tongue though, and Kida quickly got the two boys to quiet down. Why do you want to learn this stuff, anyway? Joan asked as she led the way over to the shed. Just normal human reasons, Black Nail quickly replied. Right, Hashial commented suspiciously. He was now glaring at Black Nail again, so the hobgoblin must have said something wrong. He broke his favorite bowl and wants to replace it himself. Black Nail is all about self-sufficiency and he has a lot of free time out there in the forest, Kida interjected. Ah, that makes sense, Joan observed cheerfully as they all stepped inside. There was easily enough room in the shed for the 4 humans and the hobgoblin, even though there was a small table in the center of the room and a large shelf stood against one wall. Joan went over to the shelf and picked up a large chunk of dry clay. She carried it over to the table and began to explain how to use the material and shape it. I used to make a lot of little pots and cups from clay when I was a little kid, because it was a lot of fun. My parents would bring me the stuff and help me fire it, she told everyone as she smiled brightly. Black Nail watched and listened carefully. Joan rolled up her sleeves and then crushed the clump of clay into dry powder. She then added a bit of water to re-wet it and began rubbing it between her hands to make a ball and several long cylinders. The bowl began to take shape when she had flattened the ball to make the bowl's base and placed several rings of clay on top of it. After that, she smoothed the clay out with her fingers until it looked like a real bowl. Now you just need to fire the clay. Here in the village we use a kiln but you don't need one. You can use a fire pit if you know what you are doing, she explained as she held up her little grey bowl. That seems easy enough, Kida observed. She sounded confident but Black Nail was sure she hadn't been paying attention during half the lecture. He would have to make sure he remembered everything. It's just dirt. Why are you all staring at it? Scamp asked from where he was standing next to Black Nail. The little goblin was peering up over the table at the unfinished bowl in Joan's hands. Everyone turned to look at him when he spoke up. No one had noticed him approach, but he was the center of attention now. Black Nail groaned. Things had been going so well. Hearts and homes 9. Oh, hello, Scamp said as everyone in the shed turned to look his way. The goblin gave the humans a friendly wave and smiled at them. He looked like he was enjoying all the attention. The 3 young villagers didn't return the goblin's grin. Joan went stiff from fear and Eris stepped in front of her protectively. Hashial just looked really confused and more than a little disbelieving. His eyes were wide with surprise. A goblin! Eris yelled dramatically, as if he was doing something more than stating the incredibly obvious. Black Nail wondered if it was too late to kill Scamp and pretend he knew nothing about him. It wasn't impossible that a goblin could randomly wander in here. Yep, I'm a goblin. You're smart for a human. Scamp replied cheerfully. This forced Black Nail to acknowledge that it was too late to kill him. Random feral goblins didn't talk like that. You can't be here. Black Nail hissed. You're supposed to stay out in the forest. The villagers aren't supposed to see you. Staying behind is boring, and you didn't say I couldn't come, Scamp whined back. I miss the others. I want to see Geralt. It talks. How can it talk? Eris asked. He sounded like he was in shock. A good punch to the side of the head would probably clear his mind, or wipe his memories. Either would work for Black Nail. Scamp isn't dangerous, Kida hurriedly explained as she stepped over and placed a hand on top of the goblin's head. He's a pet that was trained by a member of our band. Goblins can talk. Hashial asked in a great display of human ingenuity in the face of the unexpected. They can if you teach them, Black Nail grumbled. There is no point though, if they are too stupid to follow orders. Don't be so mean to him, Kida told Black Nail as she patted Scamp on the head. The little goblin looked smug. How did it get in here? We have walls and the gate is watched, Avis asked. I snuck through a hole under the wall, it wasn't very hard, Scamp explained helpfully. Goblins can talk? Hashial asked again. He didn't seem to realize that that question had already been answered, and his obnoxious repetition was really starting to grate on Black Nail. I've never seen a goblin this close before, Joan remarked as her shock gave way to curiosity. Scamp wasn't all that intimidating for a goblin, unless you counted his smell. I have. A few years ago, one got its hand stuck in a hole in the side of a barrel, while it was reaching for the apples inside, Avis said. The beastie caused quite the commotion right outside our window that night, so my mother grabbed a broom and went out to deal with it. She got a few good smacks in before the critter gave up on the apples, pulled its hand out, and ran off. We should report this to Mr. Tannen, Hashial told his friends. This earned him a place on Black Nail's most annoying human list. It wasn't a long list, because people kept dropping off of it, usually in spectacularly fatal ways. Life was funny that way. There's no need to tell anyone. Goblins probably sneak inside this village all the time, like in Ava's story. What is Tannen going to do about it? Kida replied before chuckling dismissively. He should still know. What, are you afraid of the little goblin? He's just a pet, Kida teased him. Of course not, the blonde boy quickly replied as he blushed a bright red. He tried to stand tall and look confident, but since he couldn't meet Kida's eyes he just looked insecure. Then a tough guy like you doesn't need to tell anyone about a harmless goblin like Scamp. This can be a small secret just between us, Kida told him as she smiled suggestively. Her words actually caused Hashial to smile back and nod, although Black Nail had no idea why. It was more than a little weird. I'm not harmless, Scamp muttered before Black Nail placed a gloved hand on top of his head and gave it a firm squeeze. To the others it looked like a friendly pat, but Scamp flinched and quickly shut his mouth. I can understand why you kept the trained goblin a secret, Joan observed. A lot of people don't like the little pests and wouldn't want it wandering around. They're just being stupid, Avis added. I've never seen a goblin attack anything bigger than a chicken. They're not nearly as dangerous as the adults like to pretend. Yes, completely harmless, Black Nail pretended to agree as he nodded. Since the whole Scamp issue seemed settled, he turned to Joan. Thank you for the lesson, he told her. It was nothing. We're all supposed to be getting along now, she replied as she gave him a bright cheery smile. Even with the creepy faceless ranger who hangs out in the forest, Avis muttered to himself. Black Nail heard him but chose to pretend he hadn't. The kid wasn't worth his time. Since the demonstration was complete and he had learned what he wanted to know, Black Nail spun around and left. The human settlement unnerved him. It was full of hostile humans, and unlike a larger city there weren't any abandoned places he could hide. The cloaked hobgoblin sent Scamp back to sneak out the way he had come in and then headed to the village gate. Kida said her own goodbyes and then followed him. They left the settlement and crossed the fields until they reached the forest. As soon as the greenery shielded them from any watchers at the village, Black Nail called for them to stop. We will wait for Scamp, he announced. Hey, that's unlike you. Why are we waiting for him instead of going on ahead? Kida asked. I saw wolf tracks on the way here. There is a pack around, so no one should go out alone, Black Nail replied as he scanned the forest around them. Nothing seemed out of place. You're afraid of some wolves. Black Nail turned and snarled at Kida. I'm not afraid. I'm just smarter than a dumb girl like you. One of the wolves smells wrong. It might be a threat. They're just some dumb dogs, the redhead replied defensively. Her response infuriated Black Nail. He didn't need to hear such nonsense from a weakling like Kida. She had no idea what she was talking about. The hobgoblin spun around and smacked her across the side of the head. Ow, Kida cursed as she reeled away from him in surprise. One of her hands came up to rub her sore head. It hadn't been a strong blow but it had still hurt. Enough, listen instead of talking. Black Nail hissed, you will not enter the forest alone until I say so. I am the leader and you are the minion. The green is dangerous. You do not question, and you will do as I say. Fine, sorry. I won't underestimate the danger again, Kida answered. Her response didn't fool Black Nail. He saw a defiant gleam in her eyes and noticed that she hadn't really promised to obey his orders. Normally, he would just hit a few more times, but as tempting as that was, his hands were tied due to his promise to Gerlad. A more delicate solution was required. Black Nail sighed and grimaced at Kida. This wasn't going to be fun. You did good job back in the village, he admitted. It was true, somehow the redhead had actually managed to help out and not screw anything up. Just saying those words gave Black Nail a nasty headache, though. However, they caused Kida's eyes to shine with surprise. The young redhead straightened up and threw Black Nail a questioning glance as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. But, you need to listen to me. If you die all the stupid people will blame me, Black Nail quickly added. He didn't want Kida to misunderstand the reasons for his concern. He just didn't want her to mess anything up. Instead of immediately replying, Kida lunged forward and wrapped her arms around the hobgoblin's waist. He tried to jerk away from her but her hug was too tight. A giggle could be heard from Kida, and a shiver of disgust went down Black Nail's spine. This was uncalled for. What did the annoying girl think she was doing? Thanks for caring, Kida exclaimed. Let go of me, Black Nail told her. If he had known this was going to happen he would have just left her to die. After one more friendly squeeze, Kida stepped back away from the cringing hobgoblin. Black Nail was spared having to tell her anything by the timely arrival of Scamp. The goblin scampered out of the bushes and headed their way. Why are you standing around? He asked as he walked over. It took a few moments for Black Nail to warn Scamp about the wolves, but then they all headed back to the goblin lair together. Black Nail led the way along the now familiar trail. As the hobgoblin hopped on top of a tree that had fallen across the path, he caught the scent of something that put him on guard. He stiffened and quickly turned to survey his surroundings. The scent of blood was on the wind, goblin blood. Immediately, Black Nail snarled and drew himself up defensively. Practically anything could be watching from nearby. There were plenty of places to hide among the trees and branches overhead. The back of Black Nail's neck itched. Looking carefully, he spotted a patch of wet ground up ahead by the base of a tree. He jumped down from the log and stalked over to it. He moved cautiously, but once there he crouched down and sniffed it. It was definitely goblin blood. Scamp had detected the same smell. His expression was alert and he kept right behind Black Nail, where it was safest. Even Kida had realized something was wrong. She kept her mouth shut and looked slightly nervous as she followed the hobgoblin. Black Nail ignored them and began to sniff around the tree. A trail of blood spatters led away from the roots and towards a bush. He pushed the branches aside and found another patch of wet ground. There was also a tuft of reddish fur stuck to one of the branches, and it smelled of wolves. A goblin was killed here, one of mine, Black Nail growled angrily as he stepped back from the bush with the fur in hand. He vaguely recognized the scent of the goblin. It had been from his tribe even if they hadn't interacted much. Still, a pack of wolves had entered the territory Black Nail had claimed and attacked his tribe. This could not stand. He wouldn't let it. Poor little thing. Was it killed by the wolves you warned me about? Kida asked. Yes, Black Nail hissed as he threw the fur aside and began walking down the trail again. Where are you going? And what are planning to do? Back to camp. I can do nothing now. The wolf scent is from hours ago, Black Nail explained as his companions began following him again. It wasn't unusual for a goblin to be eaten by something like a wolf, in fact it happened all the time. However, Black Nail knew that there was more to this. He could feel it in his bones. This pack of wolves wasn't normal, and it was going to strike again, so he had to be ready for them. The hobgoblin began to think this new unwanted problem over as he headed back to his lair. By the time he stepped out of the forest, he realized that there wasn't much he could do. He wanted to hunt the beasts down and rip them apart with his bare claws, but that wouldn't work. He didn't have the time to try and hunt down a pack of wolves, and he could afford to lose a few goblins anyway. As the leader, his time was more valuable than their lives. Gob had to be informed though, so some basic precautions could be put in place. Kida and Scamp went off to do their own thing, as Black Nail walked into the clearing and past the rocky hills until he found Gob working away at building the longhouse. The other hobgoblin had several goblins helping him out, and they had accomplished quite a lot. All the poles were up to create the building's frame, and now they were working on weaving the bark walls. Black Nail interrupted the work long enough to explain the new threat to Gob. If you send goblins out make sure they move in groups and have spears. I don't want to lose any useful minions, Black Nail told him. Yes, great chieftain. I shall be careful as a clam and if I see these wolves I will kill them myself, for your glory. Gob replied. The hobgoblin then bowed reverently. That's not what I said. Don't try to kill the wolves yourself. You'll die, Black Nail told his minion. As you wish, great master. I will let you have the honor of killing the beasts. They will fall before you. Sure, Black Nail replied uncertainly. Now that Gob was getting better at speaking he was saying some weird things. Black Nail no longer questioned the hobgoblin's loyalty, just his grasp on reality. Still, it was nice to finally be appreciated by someone. After dampening Gob's excitement a bit, Black Nail went right back to work on his main project, making some god's damned bowls, so he could cook up some bloody stew. He now knew how to use clay and where to find it, so it was time to go get it. Black Nail quickly rounded up a few of the nearest overseers and then had them gather up several other goblins. Black Nail led the way over to the stream at the edge of the camp, and followed it until they found a deposit of grey clay. Behind him came the goblin workers that would do the actual digging and carrying, and behind them came the overseers who watched the other goblins and used their spears to poke any of them that tried to run away or get out of work. It was an inefficient system but it worked, and best of all Black Nail could stand back give the orders without having to dirty his own hands. He didn't have to worry about all the workers and could just punish the overseers if anyone messed up. Soon, the work party was heading back to base. Every worker was covered from top to toes in mud and was carrying a big lump of clay. Once at the lair, the spoils were piled atop a large flat rock where they could dry in the sun. Black Nail admired the grey blobs for a few minutes before getting bored and wandering off. He had been hoping it would be more exciting. Since it was starting to get late, Black Nail had his overseers round up a new group of cleaner goblins and put Elias in charge of making supper. Black Nail then took it easy and went back to building himself a bed. After taking a break to eat he managed to finish and get the construct made of strapped together poles moved into his cave. With some stuffing made of dried plants under his blanket it was even sort of comfy. When she came in to sleep for the night, Kida saw it and decided to make her own eventually. It's too bad there isn't anyone nearby I can steal a bed from, she muttered as she went to sleep on the ground. The next morning, when Black Nail woke up he decided his next personal project would be some sort of door for his cave. There had been a bit of a draft last night. However, since he didn't have the materials for that right now he put it on hold. There were lots of other things that needed done anyway. The early morning sun was just peeking above the trees as Black Nail stepped outside. From his vantage point at the cave entrance he could see the various projects underway in the middle of the rocky clearing. Where empty rock had once been several drying racks stood, and the frame of the longhouse Gob was building was off to the side. In the center of everything was a pit ringed by a circle of stones where most of the cooking was done, and off by itself was another pit used to smoke meat. 2 goblin guards were holding spears and watching the cave that Black Nail had made into a larder. The hobgoblin yawned and decided to head to the larder so he could make sure the food wasn't being stolen, and he could grab something to eat while he was there. Of course, there was some food missing but that was to be expected. The guards would keep other people out but there was no one to prevent them from stealing the food themselves. As long as they only took enough to fill their own stomachs that was fine, though. Once in the cave, Black Nail chowed down on some smoked rabbit meat and a large white root. It was going to be a busy day so he wanted a full stomach. Things were finally falling in place. He had gathered minions, materials, and knowledge. Now it was time to start building up the base for real. It would be hard work but Black Nail intended on creating a goblin village. The hobgoblin growled as he walked back outside, and the guards stepped back away from him. Patience was difficult but it was necessary if he ever wanted his sweet bloody vengeance. One day, Black Nail would avenge his master, no matter what it took. Hearts and Homes 10. After stomping out of the larder, Black Nail shoved his volatile emotions aside and went to work. The most important thing Cedar had ever taught him had been how to control his rage and how to focus on things you didn't want to do. There was no one forcing Black Nail to do anything anymore, so he had to do it to himself. Only ruin awaited him if he forgot his master's lessons and acted out. He had to be patient and cunning, like a spider weaving a web. The clay was still airing out in the sun, so Black Nail headed over to the drying rack. The pelt of the deer he had slain was still stretched out on the rack. It looked ready for the next step of the tanning process, so Black Nail went off to gather some helpers. Gob was busy teaching basic tasks to goblins and disciplining the overseers so he tracked down Elias and Kida. Both of them could be found sleeping in their respective caves. Humans usually slept in very late for some reason. Do I really have to do this? Why can't you just get a blanket from Geralt or something? Elias asked as he and Kida followed Black Nail over to the drying rack. Stop being lazy. You're not doing anything but sitting around, the hobgoblin told him. Because you've basically kidnapped me and are holding me here in this god's forsaken place against my will. Elias replied angrily. Exactly, you can't leave so you may as well make yourself useful. It wasn't by mistake that Elias had ended up stuck with Black Nail. Goblins could do simple tasks like fighting and hunting, but for some things Black Nail needed helpers with a bit more brains in their skulls. He didn't have time to teach all the goblins by himself, so he planned to teach Elias and then have Elias pass the knowledge on. Since Kida had interjected herself into his plans the hobgoblin planned to use her for this as well. Isn't there something less boring I could help with? Kida asked. No, you wanted to follow me and help, so this is what you will do. Watch and learn, Black Nail told her. The hobgoblin then proceeded to show them how to finish tanning the stretched out hide. First, he took the skin down and carefully scraped the hair from it. Next, he took a big rock and bashed the animal's disembodied head until its skull broke open like an egg. The brains were then scooped out, thrown in the bucket, and mixed with water until it became soup-like. The resulting goop was worked into the hide by hand. This is so disgusting, Elias remarked as he cringed back away from the slop in the bucket. Yet tasty, Black Nail replied. He enthusiastically licked his fingers to prove the point. Can I not do this? Kida asked. The answer was no. Black Nail needed both of them to learn to do this. There was a near-endless supply of smaller hides that needed to be preserved, and he wasn't going to do it. He was the leader after all. The only reason he was working so much right now was to avoid more work later. Hopefully, once he had all his minions trained he could start napping all day while goblins brought him the best morsels of food. Once the hide had been thoroughly massaged with the brain oil by all of them, it was wrapped up and placed in the larder, where it would keep cool and be allowed to soak until tomorrow. It was annoying how making things the human way took so much time. There always seemed to be several steps where you had to just leave the material alone for hours or days. Why couldn't the humans have created better ways of doing this stuff? Were they just lazy? Are we done now? Elias asked. Yes. Now we can start making things from clay, Black Nail replied. Can I at least wash my hands? Your loss, Black Nail answered as licked his fingers clean. Now that the clay Black Nail had procured yesterday was dry it was ready to be processed. Joan had explained the process yesterday, and it hadn't sounded that hard. The dry clay was already on top of a flat rock so the workers immediately began using smaller stones to break it up and crush it down to powder. Black Nail then gathered up the dust and ran it through the loose cloth he had been given yesterday by Joan. This removed all the small rocks and bits of plants. He had been told it was possible to use your hands and pick out the unwanted debris but that this was easier. He liked easier. I can't believe I was tricked into becoming some sort of menial laborer for a hobgoblin, Elias moaned as he half-heartedly smashed the clay. Where did my life go so wrong? If you want to continue getting free food and a warm place to sleep you will work harder, Black Nail hissed back. There's more to life than eating and sleeping. This primitive shit is going to drive me mad. Kida put down her own rock and threw Elias a disdainful look before speaking up. This is the easy life compared to what I went through as a kid. The streets are a harsh place to grow up. Sure, when my brother was still around and in charge things were softer than this, but that's life. The gods raise us up and knock us down, but that works both ways. I'm here because I expect this horse to catch its stride and start going places soon. Just because I had proper parents doesn't mean my life was a piece of pie, Elias replied defensively. My family wasn't rich, and I'm the third son, so even before the draft I had to head out and find my own way in life. I got nothing I didn't earn myself. I used to fight rats that were bigger than me for garbage to eat, Black Nail told them. He had seen a few human street children before and they really didn't have it that bad. Goblins usually had it much worse. Elias grumbled to himself but went back to work without another complaint. Black Nail added water to the clay powder until it became a malleable blob that kept its shape. Hey, Joan was right. This is pretty fun, Kida remarked as she took a blob and began to shape it into a bowl. Black Nail and Elias were both doing the same thing. They soon had a dozen crude bowls ready to be fired. Now for the fire. Black Nail said as he admired his creations. Yes, the fire, a raspy voice agreed. What? Black Nail glanced over his shoulder to see who had just spoken. He was quickly treated to the sight of a pale goblin with a huge smile plastered on his face. It was Farrer. What are you doing here? Black Nail asked. How did these stupid goblins keep sneaking up on him? I'm watching, Farrer replied as he smiled at Kida and Elias. Black Nail had already known that, so the goblin's vague answer annoyed him. Where's Imp? You two creeps are always together. He's sleeping. That doesn't sound like him, Black Nail remarked. Imp always seemed to be up and about somewhere. Things change. The vague words sounded vaguely threatening, but Black Nail decided it had to be unintentional. There was no way the feral goblin knew the language all that well. Black Nail was frankly surprised he could speak at all since he was originally from this territory. Imp must have taught him. Fine, stay and watch. You will like this part. Earlier, the hobgoblin had ordered some goblins to dig a pit and gather wood and tinder. Now it was time to finish up this experiment. Black Nail, Kida, and Elias each grabbed 2 bowls and placed them in the middle of the pit. Black Nail then carefully arranged a ring of firewood around the clay items. After adding a bit of tinder, he used his flint and steel to set it all ablaze. When the wood was completely ignited and several minutes had passed, Black Nail carefully added more wood. Over the next half hour, he kept building the fire closer and closer to the bowls until the flames touched the items. That was when he placed a large pile of wood right on top of the clay and created one huge bonfire. By this time the waves of heat thrown off of the blaze was causing him to sweat profusely. Now that the fire was burning steadily, Black Nail didn't feel the need to stick around. Someone needed to watch it, though, and he had other things for Kida and Elias to do. That left only one option, Farrer. Normally Black Nail wouldn't trust a goblin to pay attention that long, but Farrer seemed to spend most his time around fire. Keep this going for at least 3 hours and then let it cool down during the night, Black Nail told the goblin. Burn things made in fire. Farrer responded excitedly. The goblin then ran over to the pile of firewood and threw another log on bonfire. Good enough, Black Nail grunted. He would come back later and make sure everything was all right. After working so hard, they all went to the larder to grab some food. Once they had filled their stomachs, Black Nail had Kida and Elias start to teach groups of goblins how to tan and preserve animal skins. They didn't have any more deer pelts, but they did have a near-endless supply of rabbits from the traps the goblins were putting out. While the others were doing that, Black Nail took another group of goblins and overseers out to gather more clay. They would need quite a lot more of the grey ooze to start mass-producing bowls and other useful items. Everyone worked hard teaching and gathering materials until it got dark. Black Nail then once again threw a huge feast using the food the goblins had brought in and stored in the larder. As the chattering masses of goblins rushed over to eat, Black Nail counted quite a few new faces. More goblins were either coming out of hiding or were wandering out of the forest and joining the tribe. There were now at least 60 goblins living in Black Nail's outpost. 16 of those were trained overseers that would actually obey orders. Weirdly, both Scamp and Imp didn't show up, but Black Nail didn't think too much of it. Maybe one of Imp's magic stones had finally exploded and killed them. The next morning, Black Nail woke up early and walked over to the smoldering remains of the bonfire he had put his clay bowls in. Kida and Elias followed him, and Farrer invited himself along. When they got there, all that was left was a pit full of black charcoal and white ash. Black Nail reached in and started rummaging through the ash to find the bowls. You might want to use a stick or something. That could be hot, Kida remarked as Black Nail yelped and withdrew his hand. Say it faster next time, Black Nail hissed sourly as he sucked his sore thumb. Kida was so useless and annoying. It was infuriating. Further digging using a stick unearthed the clay bowls. 5 of the 9 had survived the firing intact and were now an earthy brown color. Their uneven and crude shapes were nonetheless functional. The other 4 had split in half or shattered into fragments and were thus completely unusable. These 3 are mine. They all worked, Black Nail proudly congratulated himself as he selected 3 of the intact bowls at random. He was a master craftsman. That one has my fingerprint on it, Kida pointed out. I meant this one, Black Nail replied as he quickly switched the bowl with another successful one. No one said anything, but the humans both rolled their eyes. Black Nail didn't care what they thought. They were just jealous of his obviously superior skill. Since the experiment in making clay had mostly worked, Black Nail got goblins working on producing more. He needed a lot more than 5 bowls. Groups of goblins were sent out to gather clay, process it, and to dig the firing pits. Elias was put in charge of the overseers and Farrer volunteered to help him burn things. That left Black Nail and Kidda free to finish up the tanning of the deer hide. They took the hide out of the cool larder, cleaned it a bit, stretched it out between them by hand, and then softened the hide by hitting it with a stick. An odd surge of bittersweet emotions welled up in Black Nail as he worked with Kidda. He could clearly remember doing this with Cedar, although the stretching part had been more respectful and less like a game of tug-of-war, which Black Nail had easily beaten Kidda at. Once the hide was soft enough it was ready to be smoked. Black Nail sewed up the tears in the hide and placed it above the fire using a rack made of sticks. He threw green wood on the coals to produce lots of thick smoke. He smoked both sides for an hour each before taking it down from the rack and holding it up proudly. It's done. Aren't I great at hunting and making useful things? Black Nail bragged. What are you going to use it for? Kidda asked dryly. She made no comment about the hobgoblin's own question. I want to hang it at the cave door to keep the warmth in. You already have blankets. You should give it to Gob. Nope, it's mine, I caught it. Gob has really done a lot, Kidda started to say before Black Nail cut her off. Shut up, I'm the leader. I want this. It's neat, he told her as he walked off to hang up his new trophy. Who cared what Kidda thought? After admiring his work, the hobgoblin helped the goblins processing the clay when they ran into a problem. They only had the one cloth to sort the dust and it was already wearing down. Black Nail consulted with Gob and together they came up with the idea of using the soft fibers under all the bark Gob had collected to weave a mesh of their own. It took a lot of time to make the cloth, but Black Nail didn't trust the goblins to sort anything properly by hand. They were too lazy and stupid. The clearing full of rocky hills that the goblins used as a base was now constantly humming with activity. Groups of goblins were always walking around and working at different things. There were gatherers and trappers bringing back food and materials. Overseers were watching over the food. Several goblins were putting hides and meat up on the drying rack. Gob and a few helpers were almost done building the longhouse. Other goblins were firing clay or chipping stones to make tools. Black Nail had just lain down to rest for a bit in the sun, when Elias showed up and started bothering him. It's Scamp. He is sick or something, the man told him. So what? Black Nail replied grumpily. The heat from the sunlight was pleasant and he didn't want to move. He could die. More food for everyone else. It might be contagious. The little nuisance had been very quiet lately. With a sigh, Black Nail got up and followed Elias over to the cave he shared with Scamp. It was smaller and mustier than Black Nail's. It was little more than a rocky overhang with 3 walls and a large open entrance, but that probably suited Elias fine since humans didn't see well in the dark. Scamp was entangled in a dirty blanket and sleeping against the back wall. What's he doing? Black Nail asked as peered at the goblin. Nothing. He hasn't moved all day. At first I thought he was just being lazy but it's clearly more than that. Feeling suddenly uneasy, Black Nail walked to the goblin's side and looked down. He scowled at what he saw, and then he kicked Scamp in the ribs. There was a solid thud noise but the goblin didn't react. Black Nail kicked him again. What are you doing? Elias asked. He sounded alarmed by the sudden violence. Working out my frustration. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's sick. He's not sick. Scamp's sleeping because he's turning into a hobgoblin. Look, he's got tiny little horns, Black Nail hissed angrily. There was indeed a pair of horn tips growing from the goblin's head. The entire point of building up the goblin lair and disciplining the local goblins had been to create hobgoblins. However, Scamp wasn't the type of goblin Black Nail had wanted to transform. He would probably just become even more useless and eat more, a lot more. So, he will wake up soon. Yes, in a day or two, Black Nail answered before suddenly freezing. He had just had a terrible thought. Imp had been awfully quiet lately. In fact, he had disappeared at the same time as Scamp. Black Nail immediately dashed out of the cave. He had no idea where Imp usually slept so he quickly tracked down Farrer. The goblin was busy shaping clay to throw in the fire. Has Imp been sleeping all day? Black Nail asked Farrer. The goblin considered the question for several seconds before nodding in the affirmative. Black Nail resisted the urge to choke him to death. Things change. Goblins change, Farrer answered as he squished a clump of wet clay between his fingers. This news didn't sit well with Black Nail. He hadn't been expecting hobgoblins to appear yet, and Imp wouldn't have been one of his first choices anyway. He was smart but creepy, and Black Nail didn't like having powerful unpredictable minions. He wanted nice followers that were easy to control. However, a hobgoblin version of Imp would probably prove smart enough to be useful. Wait, he was missing the main point. Having a pair of newly changed hobgoblins running around the camp unsupervised was a terrible idea. Having a new hobgoblin running around with a backpack full of magical explosives was worse. Black Nail wasn't going to let that happen. He needed a plan, one that would allow him to keep the new hobgoblins out of trouble, and most importantly, keep himself in charge. Things were going to become interesting when Scamp and Imp woke up. Interlude, stuck in a rut. And that's how you milk a goat, Tannen announced as he stepped back away from the animal. There was a satisfied look on the old man's face. Fascinating, I feel enlightened by your succinct yet thorough explanation of this wonderful natural process, Gerald replied from a few feet away. He was smiling in a way that looked very forced and unnatural, almost as if he was being sarcastic. Both of the men were standing in a large dirty shed. Piles of hay littered the floor and there were several goats wandering around. The grey beasts were mostly ignoring the humans. They all seemed focused on chewing things, although Geralt had no idea what. He hadn't seen any of them eat anything. I may not be a scholar of any sort, but I know what sarcasm is, Tannen answered dryly. Geralt coughed and made an effort to reply in a more polite and respectful tone. It would be unfair to hold your circumstances of birth against you. You seem like a very wise man to me. I wasn't born in this village, young man. You're just digging yourself deeper. Like you, I stumbled upon it and then eventually decided to take up residence, Tannen explained as he walked out of the shed. He immediately looked up at the sky. It was a cloudy morning outside, but it didn't look like it was going to rain. The white clouds were slowly but steadily being dragged across the sky by a lofty wind that was barely touching the land below. No one in my group is settling down quite yet. We've merely been forced into taking a temporary reprieve from the road, Geralt had replied as he followed the older man out. Your speech sure has grown fancier since you got here. I don't like it. I had different priorities during the adventure that led me to your door. Sleeping indoors and proper meals also agree with me, but I will be leaving when the time is right. That's what I thought as well, when I first arrived. It didn't last. Tannen said as he headed down the main road towards the center of the village. Your bunch has the look of people with nowhere else to go. I can tell you've got demons on your tail that you can't outrun. Finding somewhere to lay low is probably your best bet, and there's nowhere better for that than here. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Why did you settle down here? The people were halfway decent when I got to know them, and no one here ever tried to tax me or declare themselves my better by virtue of their blue blood. I can appreciate that sentiment, but what were you running from exactly? Trying to pry into my past, eh? That's all right, it's ancient history. I was accused of being a thief by a noble and had to disappear. My father was a carpenter and the noble didn't want to pay him what his work was worth. Or at least that was what I told my wife. The truth may be more complicated, Tannen explained as he gave Geralt a conspiratorial wink. The young man smiled awkwardly in return and then looked away. Ah, that's quite similar to another tale I've heard. A woman I once knew was in a similar situation. Tannen ignored the sad look that appeared on Geralt's face and kept talking. That doesn't surprise me, but let's speak about something more relevant to the here and now. Did your education happen to include anything useful? The other members of your group have been helping out with farm work or heavy labor, but you haven't been contributing much, and you didn't seem to be paying much attention when I was showing you how to milk that goat. Maybe you know medicine or some sort of trade perhaps. I learned nothing even remotely that pedestrian. My tutors taught me the higher fields of study such as philosophy and math. Well, if I need someone to count the local chickens I will come find you, Tannen huffed. Not that I don't appreciate your generosity, but you're being awfully welcoming to me and my friends. Bah, you're a young and healthy bunch. That's the kind of blood that we need around here. There are a few young widows that have been giving you a few sideways glances. Hey, I'm sure there are, but I'm personally not in the least interested in settling down. This place doesn't quite offer the lifestyle I crave, or any other sort of style, really. Give it time. It'll wear you down. I wouldn't put money on that. I'm not the village living type. One way or another I'm going to be headed back to society, Geralt had said. He spoke in a stubborn tone that was as much for his own benefit as anyone else's. He much preferred the finer things in life over the simpler parts. They tended to smell better for one thing. The pair was passing by another shed when something caught Tannen's eye. He turned and scowled at the base of the building. Geralt followed his glance. Something had dug up under the wall and into the shed. The bottom of the wooden siding had been torn up as well and straw from inside had been dragged out. Gods damn it, Tannen cursed. It's just a little hole, Geralt replied calmly. That's the third mess I've seen this morning alone. People keep reporting small thefts and pests getting into their supplies. We don't have the resources for this type of nonsense. We need everything we have for when winter comes. Is something causing this? What do you think it is? Goblins. You can see the prints in the dirt there, Tannen answered angrily as he pointed towards the hole in the wall. The green pests get into everything, but it's not usually this bad. A pack of the damned thieves must have denned up somewhere nearby. A surprised cough escaped from Geralt's mouth and he turned away to hide his guilty expression. He had a fairly good idea what, or who, was causing Tannen's problems. It was probably the goblins that had come with Black Nail. Geralt wasn't surprised that they were making trouble, although he had been hoping Black Nail would keep them under control. At least they were only stealing small things and food, and not something that would really anger the villagers, like children. Hey, weird. I have absolutely no idea what could be causing that sort of phenomenon, none whatsoever. It must be just one of those weird little things in life that can't be explained, he said aloud. Something in Geralt's voice drew Tannen's attention, because he threw the man a suspicious look. After a second, he just grunted and looked back at the shed, though. Well, I'll let you go. I've got to deal with this mess, among other things, and I know you've got your own things to do, he said. Very true. I'll see you later, Geralt replied as he started to hurry away. There was no point sticking around and Tannen was a little too perceptive. Without looking back, Geralt headed down the dusty dirt road that ran through the village and towards the homes that had been lent to the bandits. He soon reached his destination and stepped inside. It was a small house that looked worn down. Immediately, he was confronted with the sight of several people seated around a wooden table. They were all former members of Herod's band, and they looked his way as he walked over to them. There you are. We were waiting for you. What took you so long? One of the bandits asked. He was a blond man with a sly smile. I was speaking to Master Tannen. He wanted to talk to me after he finished trying to get me interested in animal husbandry, Geralt answered with a shrug. About what? A woman asked suspiciously. I think he was fishing to see what our plans were and whether we are going to stick around. Then he knows about as much as we do, nothing. That's what we're here to discuss. So let's get to it, the blonde man said. I for one have had enough of this place. They have me helping with the planting. I don't plan on settling down to become a dirt farmer. I became a bandit for a reason. They're talking about getting work parties to cut the bush back at the edge of the clearing. That'll be hard work and dangerous, a tall bearded bandit agreed. On top of the falling trees you have to worry about pissing off a mimic or just ending up in a hungry beast's gullet. It's no wonder they have lost some of their people and are looking to replace them. It's not really any more dangerous than serving under Harad. That wasn't exactly safe. In fact, it was probably much less survivable, especially at the end there, the woman countered. Maybe, but it paid a lot bloody more, as in more than nothing. It's far from perfect here, but it's much better than anywhere else I've seen since leaving my family farm with a press gang right behind me, a shorter bandit interjected. I wouldn't mind settling down here. There is a young widow that fancies me. You should marry her. That sounds like a great way to waste away to nothing out here in the middle of nowhere, Geralt replied sarcastically. I'm getting out of this pit the first chance I get. Which brings us to the main point. Can we come up with a realistic plan to leave? The bearded bandit told everyone. We're stuck here with no money, shabby equipment and a horde of enemies laying in wait for us out there. I'm also worried about our guide going native if we leave him out there too long. He's a hobgoblin, so who knows what's going through his head. Without human contact he might go feral and disappear on us. Then we will really be stuck. Should we just leave right away and risk it all on the road? If we wait it doesn't seem like that will improve our odds any, the blonde bandit asked. I hate it here, but that trek through the woods sounds like suicide to me. Count me out, the bearded bandit interjected stubbornly. I think you're over-exaggerating the risk. Warwick has no reason to spend so much effort chasing a few survivors like us, and once we get back to civilization we can earn some coin easily enough, Beardy, another bandit laughed. My name is Ralph Levy Stanius, and I take great pride in my family lineage. If you use that bloody nickname again I'll knock your teeth out of your skull. The hobgoblin may get away with calling me what he wants, but you're not him, the bearded man replied angrily. His face was red as he rose up from his chair. All right, settle down. Let's stay on topic. No one else here wants to listen to you argue about nicknames, Geralt had told them. Now, it doesn't seem like a good idea to leave right away. I want out of here more than anyone. The thought of never again enjoying a good vintage of wine crushes my soul into nothingness, but we need to wait until we can gather some equipment and supplies at least. What about the hobgoblin? What if he disappears? Black Nail's got kiddo with him, and I have a hard time seeing him going feral, Geralt had explained. He's too intelligent for that and he enjoys his little comforts as much as any of us, if not more. He certainly whines a lot if he runs out of cheese. No, I'm more worried about him getting bored and causing a ruckus here. Black Nail will be fine in the forest, where he is safely out of the way. How much trouble can he get into out in the bush?